181. Crossing the sea. Beauxbatons ultimately made no move because the next day Lily was seen at Ouagadougou in Africa. Ouagadougou, millennia old and renowned for alchemy and potions, had not wholly transformed into a dedicated alchemy school, but as a giant on the African continent, its influence rivaled Beauxbatons and even surpassed it in some specialized fields. It was a pity that ecological damage across Africa had been severe. Desertification had eaten away massive tracts of land, and Ouagadougou remained highly self-contained and isolated, rarely cooperating with other wizarding powers. That isolation produced excellent alchemy and potion techniques, but prevented Ouagadougou from expanding production and becoming the near monopoly that Beauxbatons was. No one knew exactly what Lily discussed with the headmasters, but afterward, Ouagadougou unusually expanded its herb gardens and the mining areas on Moon Mountain. Maintaining those resource zones required significant labor. Given the current Muggle population in Africa, they recruited far fewer students each year than Hogwarts, and each student was so busy they might as well have been 3 people. Beauxbatons noticed. Their exclusivity clause with Hogwarts meant the school was officially their sole channel. A unilateral breach would have terrible consequences. Yet if Lily tweaked the formula, renamed inciting spray, and cooperated with Ouagadougou, they would be powerless to stop her. Beauxbaton, always merchants first, were used to making offers and negotiating when rebuffed. They did not expect Lily to appear decisively at Ouagadougou. They quickly dispatched a representative carrying galleons and supplies worth far more than the current shipment and returned to the castle. The man, a smiling interim sales manager, never mentioned the formula. He congratulated Hogwarts on its decision to return and made casual inquiries about Ouagadougou. In reality, Lily had not gone to discuss inciting spray. After learning of Beauxbaton's intentions from Hermione and Fleur, the potions master had accurately read the merchant's plans. Her trip to Ouagadougou was to negotiate broader potions cooperation. Beyond Godric's Hollow's own needs, Hogwarts's move back to the Scottish Highlands would demand vast quantities of potions. Negotiating on behalf of both institutions produced a considerable total trade volume. She intended to do this anyway, but since Beauxbatons had applied pressure at the same time, she used the opportunity to put pressure back on them. A week passed in an instant. The castle arrived off the coast of Calais, and Hermione completed her second paper, handing it to Professor Flitwick. Since Christmas, her energy had been mostly absorbed by animagus work and the Caro siblings. She had paid little attention to the follow-up on the Cragshard paper. Across many wizarding settlements with mineral deposits, that magic had begun to be learned by lower-level wizards. In claustrophobic, low-oxygen, or toxic gas mines, it was inefficient and deadly to rely on Muggle labor. It was more practical for wizards to do the mining, leaving Muggles to handle transportation. Some wizards speculated the magic might even penetrate Muggle ceramic steel power armor and have unexpected effects in close combat, though no one had reported experimenting with that. Hermione's second paper, however, was about combat magic, Skyfall magic, taught by the Crystal People to the Carrion royal family. It could create a persistently floating orb above the caster's head that continuously scattered rain-like magical projectiles over a wide area toward a chosen direction. While it operated, the caster could move or cast other spells unaffected, essentially gaining a constantly firing floating cannon at their side. Because it was a wide-area attack, it was highly practical and likely to suit contemporary wizards' tastes better than Cragshard. It was now mid-May. Most subjects were wrapping up new content and moving into review for the year. Hermione didn't worry about grades. She rushed to finish her paper because Hogwarts was about to cross the sea. That would require an enormous, long-duration floating charm, and she would work with Dumbledore, primarily to monitor the stability of the Philosopher's Stone. Unlike before, the floating charm powered by the stone was meant to make the entire castle truly fly across the channel, not bob and float like a bathtub. That would be entirely inconsistent with the castle's image. Many wizards already knew Hogwarts' route and were watching from both coasts. Noble patrons had commissioned Daily Prophet journalists, hoping to capture the castle skimming the waves, or at least the sight of waves striking its barrier. In that light, Hogwarts no longer needed to keep hidden. Since the route and destination are nearly public, and we will soon establish ourselves in a place known to the world, what meaning does this thousand-year secrecy charm still have? Hermione argued. The secrecy charm was powerful. Graduates still could not see the castle's location, but it could not stop Muggles from blindly dropping nuclear bombs based on coordinates supplied by traitorous wizards. Simple hiding consumed huge amounts of magic with diminishing returns. The world has changed. We must change our principles. Hogwarts should be more open. Let the world see it. Openness is a sign of confidence. Dumbledore pondered long and hard, then agreed. He personally altered the ancestral wards and lifted the veil from the castle so that everyone could see it. This crossing is an opportunity to display our strength, he said with a smile. Perhaps it will make more wizards confident in us, rather than allowing them to be led by Malfoy Manor. For a ghost who had been bound to an old way of doing things, such a change was itself an act of courage. Under countless ill-intentioned and curious gazes, Hogwarts suddenly revealed itself. Its 4 massive stone feet curled up, and under an unseen propulsion, the whole mountain-like edifice rose into the air. Points of purple light flowed among the rocks beneath the castle. That was the gravity magic Hermione had bound to the Philosopher's Stone, which greatly reduced Dumbledore's burden. The interweaving of the 2 different power systems let the castle fly steadily, casting a vast shadow over the sea. Wizards on both shores were stunned. They had expected that even with the Philosopher's Stone's power, the castle would have to fly slowly and skim the surface. Who would have imagined that a structure the size of a mountain could be lifted so high by human craft? Some even whispered that Hogwarts might float in the sky forever, becoming a mobile aerial fortress. The journalists who had come for a spectacle instead captured a breathtaking scene. Hogwarts, like a divine peak, rose and unhurriedly crossed the channel. In just half a day it had flown from Calais and landed outside the scarred, ruined outskirts of Dover. Merlin or Solomon, Dumbledore may be recreating legends, proclaimed the next day's headline in the Quibbler, while the Daily Prophet and similar outlets remained uncharacteristically silent, as if they had not witnessed a thing. 182. Blushing Boy. The moving castle reappeared over Britain and terrified the Muggles in the countryside, who fled screaming. Though Hogwarts still existed inside an abnormal spatial pocket and hadn't displaced so much as a single stone, the villagers behaved as if a demon's fortress had descended. The braver among them held up broken wooden crosses and prayed aloud. "We'll head to London from here," Dumbledore announced. "We estimate we'll reach the once foggy city before the end of the term. Of course, it is only ruins now after the bombing." London had been hit hard. Many wizards whose families or homes were destroyed had apparated there with nuclear bombs, determined to die with what remained of their past. The Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, countless museums and historical buildings, even Diagon Alley and other wizarding neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. King George VI and Prime Minister Churchill had died in the blast. The Muggle government collapsed overnight. Similar catastrophes had overtaken many other countries. The Muggles had been defenseless against the wizards' sudden assault, which aligned with Grindelwald's idea that change should come overnight and quietly, not dragged out in a war. Dumbledore planned to use the Philosopher's Stone to cleanse the radiation in London. Whether for history or to demonstrate the school's power, doing so would show the wizarding world what Hogwarts could do and would effectively silence nobles who still favored Malfoy Manor. The castle will stop in London. That will be our last stop on the way back north. We'll stay there to rest and reorganize through the end of the summer holidays. After the new first years arrive, we'll conduct the wand selection there. Going further north afterward would probably be neither safe nor appropriate. He had thought far ahead before deciding to return to the Scottish Highlands. "What about the wand selection the following year?" Hermione asked. "We can't take the school everywhere. If the old site is too dangerous, sending new students there would be unwise." "You're already sounding a bit like a little witch," Dumbledore said with a smile. He welcomed Hermione's concern for the school's future. "I have several plans, but they will need to be adjusted depending on conditions then, on the environment around the old Forbidden Forest, the state of Malfoy Manor and its allies, and on finding new wand makers. I've taken all that into account. Satisfied by his confidence, Hermione stopped worrying. It was a problem for next year. If the sky fell, the white-bearded man would find a way to hold it up. As the end of term approached, Professor McGonagall began organizing arrangements for the summer study trips. Harry easily persuaded Professor Lily to let him stay with the Weasleys for the summer, and Neville completed his negotiations with the Longbottoms via a ghost owl. His grandmother, the formidable Augusta, would go to the burrow to help Molly look after the children. Mrs. Weasley was thrilled at the prospect of the entire Gryffindor second year arriving and wrote to Ron not to worry about rooms. Arthur had taken care of it. Hermione, however, realized she could not spend the whole summer in Devon. She would need to visit Gornuk's Goblin Realm midterm and return for a Hogwarts board meeting. With the nobles in turmoil, it was unclear whether they could break the deadlock and elect a new speaker. Many would likely claim to represent Malfoy Manor. While the Gryffindor Four began planning their holiday, Draco, who had kept a low profile since the fight in the Verdon Gorge, sought Hermione out. Ron had told their version of the battle as a thrilling tale, how the three of them dealt with Electo Caro, how Harry used a tactic to wound her, how Ron bravely blocked curses, and how Neville had landed an incredible final strike. Because of his personal bias, Ron's telling reduced Draco to mere bait, pretending to be stunned by a stupefy, too timid to fight. His last-minute action was made to sound trivial, something Neville could have done alone. Reporters then exaggerated that story and printed it for everyone to read. Draco said nothing in return. He had learned that words alone would not make others accept him. Still, Ron's version rallied other Slytherins to his side. They believed Draco had done more and accused the Gryffindors of jealousy. They demanded Draco tell his side and have it published. But Draco had no wish to air the part where he had been used by Death Eaters. Worse, he was starting to feel dissatisfied with his own strength. Though he had played a crucial role at a critical moment, the gap between him and the Gryffindor trio seemed to widen. His efforts and hardships felt wasted. From Ron's tale, he learned that the three boys had trained with Hermione every night after Christmas. If they had worked that hard, no wonder they outperformed him. Books alone would never close that gap. He had to take the initiative and change his situation. "Hermione, I want your special training too," he said in a corridor, his neck stiff and his face flushed. He had chosen a time with few people around, so rejection would be less humiliating. He had nothing else to rely on. His mother was an ordinary nurse in the hospital wing, and Dobby enjoyed his life at Hogwarts and couldn't help find dark magic instructors. Hermione was the only option. She looked at him, surprised. She hadn't expected this. Once the proud son of a noble house, Draco Malfoy would have been unlikely to humble himself so. Over the years, her opinion of him had shifted many times. At first, he had been the spoiled little aristocrat who joked about using her hand bone for a wand. If he'd acted like that again, she would have been ruthless. Receiving his gift at Christmas had felt like a quiet apology. She stopped being as annoyed and viewed him more like a stranger. Later, his role in bringing a cursed object into the school had extinguished much of her sympathy. It wasn't until he brought his mother to return the cursed object at Christmas, apparently willing to turn himself in, that she felt some relief and stopped wanting to break his legs. Then there was Dobby, the encounter with Electo, Draco's clever tactic of feigning unconsciousness, and his finishing blow at the crucial moment. Those things restored her respect. Being able to fight had earned him many points with Hermione. By now, he was hardly an annoying child on their side. Training one more person would not change much. Her coaching circle could hold a fourth head, 3 or 4 made no difference. Hermione hesitated only briefly. Draco misread the pause for a refusal. "Never mind. Pretend I didn't ask," he mumbled, crimson, and turned away. "Wait," Hermione called after him. "My training is hard, and you'll have to practice with Harry and the others. Can you accept that?" Draco stopped, surprised. "Really? If you agree, I'll try my best to get along with them." "You know you owe Harry a favor," she said, referring to his having borrowed Harry's invisibility cloak in first year. "I do," Draco admitted. Then meet me tonight at 9 in front of the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy being clubbed by a troll on the 8th floor. 183. The enterprising teenager. Ron objected strongly to a little snake suddenly joining the Marauders' base. To him, it felt like the pure Gryffindor team had been infiltrated, and that could lead to serious mistakes. Hermione, however, ignored him. In her view, this kind of special training was only suitable for a small, experimental scale for now. If they wanted to develop Hogwarts into something on the scale of the Royal Carrion Academy and train students to be more capable and powerful, they would inevitably have to change the format. Abolishing the Four Founders House system outright would provoke too much resistance, but organizing classes by subject and accepting students from any house seemed sensible. That would let pupils develop along the lines they were best at. The professors' own clubs were an early model, but they were too tied to individuals and dissolved or changed as professors came and went, which made inheritance impossible. Hermione imagined a system of classrooms independent of houses, more like the Carrion Academies. Each class specialized in a particular school of magic instead of being lumped into just charms or transfiguration. The Shining Stone magic she'd been developing alone already contained many sub-schools that could be separated. Of course, those reforms would have to wait until they were older. At their current ages, they couldn't command the respect necessary to remake centuries of tradition. Because Hermione planned to teach more people in the future, she couldn't confine herself to the Gryffindor faction. Everyone at Hogwarts was a Hogwarts student. They should be learning together, not forming cliques and being hostile because of personality differences. Harry and Neville didn't have many objections to Draco's arrival. Harry simply thought it didn't matter. Draco was already far behind. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't catch up easily. Quiet Neville wasn't the sort to exclude someone else. Lately, the trio's success against the Death Eaters had made them a little vain. They'd been basking in interviews and the attention, even putting aside the matter of facing Godric in the meditation basin. When Hermione brought Draco in, she made the four appear within the mist door. The sight of a crazed Godric charging with a huge axe sent the four boys into a panic. Before, 3 of you could make it into the second phase. Now there are 4. I suppose we can clear Stormvale Castle tonight, right? Hermione called down lightly. But the quartet's performance was not as smooth as when there had been 3. Ron griped and resisted in words, but he could put priorities straight in a fight and didn't deliberately expose Draco to danger. Still, adding another person utterly disrupted the established rhythm and tacit understanding. Draco, trying hard to prove he wouldn't be a burden, had to adapt to the meditation basin's peculiarities. The harder he tried, the more mistakes he made. He'd learned the Cruciatus Curse from Alecto, and with his power and determination, could force Godric to pause in pain. But he was too eager to act. He thrust his head forward to cast when he should have held back and nearly lost it to Godric's axe. That forced Ron to spend a lot of energy keeping him alive, wasted many openings Neville created, and prevented Harry from dealing effective damage. In under 10 minutes, the 4 were spat back out. I told you we shouldn't have brought him. Look, our rhythm's completely ruined. Ron snapped. Draco, still shaking from the illusion of being split in two, flushed at the accusation. He swallowed a retort. I just have no experience. Let me try a few more times. This won't happen forever. He had promised Hermione to get along with the trio. This was an opportunity he'd fought to obtain. His subdued reply made Ron feel a pang of shame. Suddenly he thought his earlier aggression had been petty, even less magnanimous than a Slytherin. Hermione didn't let them off easy. Turning to the trio, she scolded, instead of blaming others, why don't you look at yourselves? Have you been slacking on training lately? Was beating a Death Eater who couldn't even aim a proper Avada something to be proud of? She continued. Have you forgotten what I told you? Harry, weren't you going to practice the shield charm thoroughly? Ron, your parry has regressed, hasn't it? Neville, can you now independently unleash a Carrion Swiftblade? The 3 lowered their heads. Maz. They had indeed been busy showing off to their classmates and had let steady improvement slide. A wizard's power isn't about how many spells you can name or how many books you own, Hermione said, voice stern. It's about the heart behind it. If you're satisfied with where you are, then special training isn't necessary. Go back and enjoy being second years. She faced Draco again. Don't be discouraged. It's your first time in the Forbidden Land. Feeling unsteady is normal. But you must seize every night you can. Summer break is coming, and we won't see each other for at least 2 months. During that time, you'll have to study on your own. Based on long observation, I've taught Harry and the others different kinds of magic, tailored to their strengths. For you, I'll need to send you into the Forbidden Land more before I can tell what suits you best. Since she had decided to teach him, Hermione meant to be thorough. She treated every student the same and would never let anyone feel neglected. Whatever Harry and the others had, Draco would have too. The little Malfoy nodded, chastened. The fight with Godric had only shown him how far behind he was. Ron's criticism stung because it was true. Draco had been a liability. Harry, chastened as well, ground his teeth. Again, he leapt into the meditation basin without looking back, followed by the other three, each determined to prove themselves. As the maiden behind the tarnished, Hermione enjoyed helping them improve. Seeing the boys respond to her push gave her pleasure. She then returned to the moon and explored the new magic the tarnished had imparted. That night they still couldn't defeat Godric, but their coordination had improved. While exploring Stormvale Castle, Draco even discovered a passage leading underground. Of course, that detour ended with the four being badly beaten by a rotten tree spirit, but shared hardship is good for bonding, and the experience brought them closer. Even more unexpectedly, the next day Draco persuaded his mother, Narcissa, to let him spend the summer at the Burrow. He didn't want the progress he was finally making interrupted for 2 months, and Narcissa surprisingly agreed. A Malfoy staying at the Weasleys' house, for the first time, had a certain dramatic flair. Mrs. Weasley could scarcely shut her mouth when she heard. The adults' differences didn't spill over onto the children. Mr. Weasley cheerfully made room wherever he could, and the Burrow was soon nearly ready to run a summer daycare. 184. Elizabeth Hogwarts at last came to London. It moved painfully slowly. A wizard on a broom could have flown to Dover and back in less than an hour. But this castle had not been built to travel. Its gradual progress was already a marvel of magic. It had to be steady. Too much shaking would turn potions into a class of explosions, make pupils sick, and perhaps cause disastrous accidents in spell practice. From the banks of the Thames, the ruined city still told the story of what had happened. The bombs that detonated over London were not the only ones. Some had been carried to the ground by wizards before they went off. The damage was not concentrated like Godric's Hollow, yet the devastation here was no less terrible. A thick fog of radiation and goblin curses clung to the ruins. Only the tops of taller buildings remained visible. Strangely, the river ran clear. Without human interference, the Thames has finally had a day of emerald green, someone murmured. It's been decades. This is the first time I've come back, Dumbledore said. He and Hermione stood at the castle's edge, looking over the city. After the Industrial Revolution, Muggles learned to wreak enormous harm on nature. London took the worst of it. Back then, the river stank. Sewage and industrial waste were emptied straight into it. Diagon Alley even employed wizards to purify the air, to keep delicate, magical creatures from dying. Goblins complained that the filthy water seeped into Gringotts, Hermione added. They used electric drills that never stopped. You could hear them day and night. That city was mankind's crowning jewel in its age, Dumbledore said, and perhaps it was what finally made the goblins give up on people. Hermione listened, trying to picture how Muggles, without magic, had built such a massive, roaring civilization. Chimneys and smokestacks that reached the clouds, great iron beasts, men and machines that leveled mountains and filled seas. There was nothing like it in the Forbidden Land. Let's move closer. The castle's wards can't cover the whole city from here, Dumbledore said, and the castle eased forward. From the rim of the ruins, a ragged mob of Muggles suddenly came running toward them. They were dressed in tatters. Some carried a makeshift sedan chair, its curtains stitched from torn cloth in a crude attempt at dignity. They shouted and surged in front of the castle, brandishing rusted rifles and spears, trying to force it to stop. Dumbledore waved and the castle halted. How can there be Muggles this far in? he wondered. They must have been living here a long time. Being this close to the city was no danger for wizards, but for Muggles it was a death sentence. Exposure meant deformity and cancer. The faces before them were ugly with tumors and sores. Even across the continent, you rarely saw so many people in such a state. Is this their territory? Hermione asked, curious. These people seemed crazed enough to confront even a mountain-sized Hogwarts. Let's go down and see, Dumbledore said. He was curious too. Most of the Muggles left in England should have gathered at Malfoy Manor. Others would be in wizard settlements. The castle's sudden stop pulled teachers and students to the iron fence. Many ran to watch as Dumbledore and Hermione descended. From a distance, the Muggles stared in awe and terror. When the two landed, some dropped their weapons and prostrated themselves. Others yanked their companions up and kept their rifles trained, wary and furious. "Who is your leader? Why do you block our road?" Dumbledore asked, speaking slowly and clearly. Decades of isolation had warped the local speech. Accents were thick, and many of the new students at Hogwarts could barely speak English. Extra lessons often fell to Professor Quirrell, who knew several languages and taught reluctant children well. "Wizards, get out of our country," cried a man at the front. He looked strong and squat. Half of his face was almost rotted away. Hermione noted that, despite their condition, some of these Muggles recognized wizards. Many still thought wizards were devils or worse. Those who could identify them were the exception. "Your country?" Dumbledore asked. "Who is your king?" "The land under your feet," the man shouted, swelling with pride. "The great, the invincible, the British Empire on which the sun never sets." "You heretics, world destroyers, get off our land," he yelled, his voice full of hatred, as if it mattered what any of them could do to him. The White Wizard and the Little Witch exchanged glances. 50 years had passed. For Muggles whose culture and records had been shredded, the old names were almost myth. The older generation was gone. The young would hardly remember what those words meant. Yet these people chanted them effortlessly, as if they had been taught them 1,000 times. "I can confirm that George VI and Churchill both died in the nuclear explosions," Dumbledore said quietly. "In the decades since, I've never heard of the Muggles forming a British government in exile." "Who is your monarch? How do you prove you represent the country?" he asked more seriously. England's long history had taught even wizards to respect titles and succession. A hunched man shuffled forward to the sedan chair and began a clumsy ceremonial chant, his voice booming in the empty air. "Welcome, by the grace of God, Queen of the United Kingdom and her other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, Elizabeth II." The others produced crude instruments, bagpipes and rattling drums made from leather scraps, and banged out a twisted, discordant tune. "All right, saying it plainly would have been enough," an old voice from the sedan chair snarled. Someone pushed aside the torn curtain. The woman inside was bent and white-haired. She wore a flimsy crown of colored glass melted from copper and a magnificent robe of layered gauze scavenged from who knew where. She leaned on a strange scepter and watched Hogwarts with small, patient eyes. "Elizabeth?" Dumbledore said, staring at the woman in the sedan chair in disbelief. "Is it really you?" 185. The Tower of London will fall down. He had seen this child before the war. Elizabeth, when she was still a girl, had written countless letters after learning the magic world existed, begging to study at Hogwarts. The Windsors had no magical bloodline, so no owl came for her at 11. Because she was the daughter of the King of England, though a Muggle, she could still learn more about wizards than most Muggles. She even wrote to Armando Dippet, then headmaster of Hogwarts, but the old man dismissed the notion. He could not refuse outright, and so sent Dumbledore to appease the princess. Dumbledore remembered that meeting clearly. He had liked the intelligent, determined child, but magical talent could not be taught. He had hardened his heart and told her the truth. She would never have a connection to magic. After that, he never saw her again. The wizarding world had drifted farther from the Muggles, and Grindelwald demanded more of his attention. Then he was defeated by Grindelwald, the goblins rebelled, Muggles and wizards fought, and a nuclear blast destroyed London. He had assumed Elizabeth, like the rest of the royal family, had been lost in that light and heat. No one expected to meet her again, 50 years later. Now she stood before him an old woman, older and thinner than he remembered. Dumbledore himself had aged, his beard white, no longer the elegant middle-aged man from long ago. "You've aged a great deal, Professor," Elizabeth said, voice trembling. For a Muggle to live nearly 70 in the wasteland was a miracle. No one could guess how her frail body had survived hunger, cold, and lack of medicine. "I thought you were long dead," Dumbledore said slowly. "Have you been crowned queen? Here? In this land?" Hermione, close beside him, leaned forward and whispered, "Professor, her scepter doesn't look right. There's magic on it." Her sky eye, an amulet woven from Vela hair, made her sight unusually acute. The scepter wasn't a single shaft of metal or wood, but a bundle of thin branches tied together, fanning out at the top like a hedgehog of twigs. Many of the branches were cracked, burned, splintered, broken, and dilapidated. Dumbledore noticed it too, but only glanced and did not ask. "Before London was destroyed, I served in a women's unit supporting the war as Second Lieutenant Windsor," Elizabeth recalled. "I was on the front line and I was lucky. After that, people gathered around me and suggested I be crowned the last Queen of England." She said it plainly. "In the years surviving the wasteland, I lost my ability to bear children. When I die, England will truly disappear. You wizards need not worry." "Why didn't you go to Malfoy Manor?" Dumbledore asked. "They would have welcomed a true royal and helped you continue. The Malfoys were granted land by William the Conqueror." Elizabeth's cloudy eyes fixed on him. "You told me I would always be without magic." Those words stalled Dumbledore. He knew they had burned in her, told by a kindly man who could not promise what nature would not grant. Perhaps that rejection had poisoned her ever since, hardening her against help from wizards. He pointed toward the ruined city. "Have you been living near here? The radiation is still high. It's bad for your health." "The brave royal corps fears no challenge," a sturdy man nearby shouted, pride ringing in his voice. Perhaps their ranks were chosen by who survived the worst. No wonder many of them showed mutations. Their lives were probably shortened by exposure. Even if they survived the blast, the radiation would rot them over time. "Hogwarts is only temporarily here," Dumbledore said softly. "We will clear the radiation from this area to make life safer. In less than 3 months, we will leave and go to the old site of the castle in Scotland." Elizabeth did not move. She sat in her sedan, looking at the old wizard with a calm, flat stare. "Wizards lived 200 years, I hear. Even before the war, wealthy Muggle nobles rarely reached 80. She sounded almost amused. "You must be over 100, and yet you still look strong. Perhaps among wizards you are considered to be in your prime." Dumbledore's change had been so subtle that no one noticed he had become something other than he had been. "And I am already old and frail," she continued. "Children born in recent years will see me as a monster. They've never seen someone who has lived this long." Educated beyond most wasteland survivors, Elizabeth was a living relic. Her knowledge earned her respect. She even carried a mechanic's certificate, could fix trucks, maintain engines. "Muggles fear wizards, just as children fear me," she said. "We are two different species. You are right. Magic is not for us." Her fingers stroked the scepter as if it were a treasure. Dumbledore opened his mouth, then she interrupted him. "After London was destroyed, Diagon Alley lost its concealment," she said. "Those brave children who had memorized the map rushed into the ruins to search for supplies. They found Ollivanders and dug up many damaged wands from the rubble." She laughed, a little sadly. "I have always been obsessed with magic. Even when the country was gone, I wanted to collect everything to do with it." She lifted her right hand, and the scepter vibrated. The sedan chair rose from the servant's shoulders and floated down before Dumbledore. It was then Hermione noticed the truth. The Queen's lower body had entirely vanished. Whatever had happened to her was horrific. "The scepter of staff remains. That's what I call this masterpiece," she said, looking at it. "It was born from a random pile of broken wands, as if it answered my desire for magic. It can make Muggles' wishes come true." Dumbledore's face darkened. He stared at the scepter. "It does not come without a price. It consumes your life." "I rarely use it," Elizabeth replied, her eyes on the device. "It only reminds me that I am a Muggle without talent." Her gaze shifted to the makeshift Hogwarts with a mixture of longing, unfamiliarity, and cold hatred. "Hogwarts, the legend I've heard since childhood," She broke off, pain in her voice. But if I do not possess that talent, why let me know of it? Dumbledore had no answer. Too many stories between wizards and muggles began in that same painful place. Difference of birth, difference of gift. Elizabeth had simply been born to the wrong world and knew a world she had no right to belong to. If you wish, we can bring you up to the castle, he offered gently. Our healers and potions masters might be able to mend your body. She shook her head. Magic rejected me once already. Her eyes were cold. And this time, London will reject you. Dumbledore saw acceptance of death in her look. The Queen had lived long enough. She knew she could not destroy the castle, but she could use her last act to speak as the last sovereign of her nation. She raised the scepter of staff remains high. It emitted a violent hum. A faint, murky yellow light poured from it, and her body began to vanish, disintegrating from the waist down. In the name of the last Queen of England, London will refuse the wizard's presence, she cried. Her voice was edged with the long ache of everything taken from her. City of man, no place for monsters. She screamed like a madwoman. The disintegration sped up. In moments, only her head and arms remained. Around her, the Muggle crowd knelt, heads bowed to their queen. Dumbledore and Hermione stood to the side, watching in silence. The scepter of staff remains, fueled by her sacrifice, flared with increasing brilliance. A phantom city began to rise from the ruin clouds, faint lights resolving into palaces, chimneys, and statues. From Elizabeth's memory, the city reassembled, 50 years reborn in mist and spectral stone. At last, with only her crowned head left, she stopped. The scepter slipped from her weakening hands and clattered free. Dumbledore levitated it and caught it. Loyal guards moved swiftly to receive the Queen's head. She took one last look at the glowing, ghostly city and the tall spire of the Tower of London. It won't fall, she whispered. With that longing and reluctance, the old woman closed her eyes. This is the source of their hatred, something we have and they do not, Dumbledore said. The Muggles scattered, carrying the Queen's body away for burial. Perhaps they would continue to see themselves as the rightful rulers of Britain and try to carve out a life on this land, but they no longer had a king and never would again. A city modeled on Elizabeth's memories stood stubbornly amid the ruins, visible to all. It was an illusion. Muggles could pass through it freely, but it repelled wizards and even the castle. Every step toward its light brought a heavier pressure. With Hogwarts' power, a single blast might scatter it, but Dumbledore hesitated. Let Elizabeth's final stubbornness linger a little longer. This city won't last, he said wistfully. Unwittingly, his words had once snuffed out the dreams of a young woman. To the wizards now, the vengeance she had pursued with her life seemed almost a petty joke. Whether by careful detour or violent demolition, that rootless, illusory city had no real means of resistance. At best, it could be the final echo of the empire on which the sun never set, boasting its past to the people of the wasteland. At most 2 months, maybe only 1, and it will fade on its own. The Staff of Wand skeletons, a chance-born treasure, radiated an ugly, resentful aura, perhaps the wails of snapped wands or the lament of Muggles' denied talent. It could grant wishes, but at the price of one's own flesh and blood. Wizards could use it to cast spells, but its feel was rough and awkward, inferior even to wandless magic. The staff craved blood more than spellwork. It seemed to prefer being wielded by Muggles. Dumbledore decided to seal it away, rather than return it to those seemingly unwise hands. In the wrong place, it could do great harm. Curious about the settlement, George and Fred stole brooms and flew out of school at night, and they found it. The Muggles lived in a ramshackle military camp on the upper Thames. The water and radiation levels there were much lower than downstream. They had vegetable plots and tents. Old military supplies were worn, but once patched, still serviceable. Many students followed the twins, hovering above and watching through telescopes. The people in the camp had taken on some of Elizabeth's lessons, hostile toward wizards, but not openly violent. They went about their lives and held a simple, solemn funeral for their queen. They had gathered broken industrial machines, enough to cobble together trucks, though gasoline was nearly gone and most vehicles were barely serviceable. They ran hand-cranked production lines for rifles and bullets that frequently jammed. Without a steady source of gunpowder, they conserved every cartridge. The teachers did not forbid the students rough spying. After all, it was valuable to learn about Muggles. Though Madame Hooch was furious, the twins used Quidditch practice as an excuse to disappear. The mirage of the city was too conspicuous. Wizards from elsewhere flocked to see it. None could enter it either, so they camped at the foot of Hogwarts and observed from a distance. Present-day wizards had never actually seen a Muggle city. A Daily Prophet reporter, returning with more zeal than care, spun a sensational tale. Dumbledore had been tyrannical, the cause of Britain's last queen's death. For the nobles at Malfoy Manor, who valued any royal blood in their lineage, this was an opportunity to lambast Hogwarts and claim outrage. They had no clue how Elizabeth had made such an illusion and could only credit Merlin. Hermione was entranced. Using a levitation on herself and a telescope, she examined the city closely. She studied its statues and grand buildings, the Tower Bridge over the Thames, the constant traffic of boats, the streets full of small cars, and an underground structure Dumbledore called the subway. Countless chimneys belched black smoke. In poorer quarters, filth and stench lingered, yet none of it dimmed Hermione's curiosity. She spent hours each day learning about this city and the Muggles who had lived there. But the whole place behaved like a sequence of very short clips. Everything that moved could only travel a little way before snapping back to its starting point, repeating the same loop. It was less alive than images from a magical camera. As more wizards gathered, they formed an impromptu market below the castle. They traded goods, lit bonfires, sang and danced, a spectacle that drew nearby Muggles to peek, baffled by what they saw. Dumbledore, for a time, relaxed the restrictions and allowed visiting wizards onto the Quidditch pitch to watch the inter-house match that was drawing to a close. On the field, Draco and Harry's personal tensions had eased, but they still met as fierce rivals. The house standings were nearly identical to the year before, Gryffindor far ahead, followed by Slytherin and Hufflepuff, with Ravenclaw trailing. Hufflepuff could never outmuscle the Eagles, but they had Cedric, a key player who had repeatedly led them to upset victories. This year, Gryffindor not only held first place, but had built a huge point lead. Unless the other three houses overtook one another in unlikely fashion, Gryffindor's win was almost assured. Harry's skills as Seeker had sharpened hugely under Hermione's private coaching. No one could catch the golden snitch before him. He controlled when a game ended. When the other players were evenly matched, he would end the match quickly once Gryffindor had a lead, denying the others any chance to rally. Captain Wood would be in his 7th year next year and had begun grooming Harry as his successor, so the team would have a smooth transition when he graduated. With many 7th years set to leave, several positions would open on the team. Ron and Neville decided to try out next year, hoping to become Harry's teammates. Exam week came around quickly, and with it the end of the school year. Lockhart was finally discharged from the school hospital by Madame Pomfrey. He had recovered physically, though his left hand was still weak. Professor Flitwick had already finished his classes, so only the final exams remained. Even after his long stay in the hospital, students who saw Lockhart noticed that something was different. His trademark, confident, sunny grin was gone, replaced by a quieter, restrained smile. At times he avoided eye contact and would drift off, staring out of windows as if lost in thought. Most assumed the basilisk battle had left him badly shaken. Hermione and Dumbledore quietly agreed not to tell anyone about his split personalities. It helped, too, that he no longer had to teach daily. If he had, the change would have been far more noticeable. All Lockhart needed to produce now was a suitable final exam. Drawing on Hermione's training methods and borrowing Dumbledore's meditation basin, he constructed an exam dreamscape. Alongside a written paper, there was an enormous obstacle course of wit and courage, its challenges ranging from easy to fiendish and covering everything taught that year. He set 7 passing lines, 1 per grade level, so a student had to clear the checkpoint corresponding to their year to pass. They could push on to higher tiers for bonus points, the exact value at the professor's discretion. Students could attempt it alone or in teams, but scores were individual. No one could hitch a ride on someone else's success. Staggered scheduling kept him from being overwhelmed. For the second years, Harry and two of his friends initially considered teaming up with Draco, but Draco, aware of Slytherin eyes, politely declined. His relations with the other Slytherins had only just settled back to normal, and he chose to go solo. Hermione, however, entered the dreamscape like a storm. She tore through checkpoints with unstoppable momentum, reaching a section even some seventh years hadn't finished. Layers of shield charms rode her like armor as she cut through the gauntlet with clinical efficiency. Devastating meteor-like volleys turned enemy engines into fireworks. Warped gravity made her a blur. She shrugged off sneak attacks and concentrated barrages alike, advancing and retreating without ever breaking her expression. Artillery couldn't touch her. Planes were ripped from the sky and turned to scrap. Completing her animagus had pushed her further still. Between that and a leap in transfiguration, her command of magic had widened dramatically. The change, an almost lunar clarity in her thinking, amplified her comprehension and multiplied her power. Lockhart could only smile wryly. The stealth and rescue checkpoint he had designed to be the hardest was turned by Hermione into a one-woman campaign of total domination. Harry's challenge team likewise performed admirably. They cleared the second-year passing line and pushed all the way to the fifth-year checkpoint before they were undone. Vampires hidden in the darker reaches of the castle ambushed them, taking them down one by one. It was a disappointing exit, but their performance still earned them an O for outstanding. Even the Weasley twins, watching from the stands, joked that they had nearly been outdone by their younger brother. Fred and George themselves, working together with characteristic synergy, managed to clear the fifth-year barrier and were halted at the entrance to the sixth. Draco, determined to prove himself, advanced alone. Lockhart adjusted difficulty for solo challengers, but a second pair of hands still helps. Draco used every advantage he had and resorted even to an illegal level cruciatus to muscle his way forward, reaching the fourth-year checkpoint. The term unforgivable curses was, these days, mentioned less in practical exams. The professors disapproved, but Draco faced no school punishment for what he had done. In the end, Hermione and the others with her baggage completed Defense Against the Dark Arts with outstanding marks. Their practical combat ability had left their peers far behind. Meanwhile, the Forbidden Land Quartet had one final triumph. After a period of adjustment, Harry, Ron, Draco, and Neville finally defeated Godric the Grafted. Under a combined wall of shield charms from Harry, Ron, and Draco, they held back Godric's dragon breath long enough for Neville to drive a Carrion Swiftblade straight through the dragon head grafted to Godric's arm. Draco followed with a brutal cruciatus. Ron charged in with shield aloft and with quick thinking used the shield to parry Godric's battle axe. Harry finished the sequence with a single, decisive chain attack. With Godric down, Stormvale Castle fell. Of course, they weren't at their absolute peak. Without great runes, the stakes would have been even higher, but the victory cleared a major hurdle. Then came the announcement. Lockhart would not be staying on as head of Slytherin or as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. He asked to speak privately with Hermione to explain, apologizing and thanking her. "I've done a lot of thinking," he said quietly. "Maybe an idealized version of me could handle teaching and being watched all the time. The real me, I don't find happiness in it. I'm not cut out to be constantly under other people's eyes." Hermione listened. Given his nature, she had no right to stop him from seeking a life that suited him. Lockhart had made his classes lively and his practicals memorable, but that was a performance. Now it seemed he needed something else. "I didn't expect this year to make you find yourself," Hermione said, "and yet it did. I'm sorry Hogwarts will lose you." "So am I," Lockhart admitted, "but I'll come back if there's ever a need. You have my word." "Where will you go?" Hermione asked. Lockhart looked up at the sky. "First, I'll go to Malfoy Manor. I need to bury my sisters. I haven't seen my mother in years either. Maybe we'll have a proper fireside conversation." He smiled faintly. "After that, I hear the group who wanted to go to Greenland last year never left because they couldn't find escorts. I'm thinking of crossing the sea with them. If that so-called ideal land turns out to be corrupted by dark wizards, I'll see to those smug cultists myself." Hermione nodded. "And your book, don't forget it. I'm waiting for the new edition." "That's something I can do," Lockhart said. Maybe I can be better at writing than at the showmanship. In a few years, I might put together a proper volume about Hogwarts. Maybe you'll be one of the main characters. He hesitated, then unbuckled a long sword from his side and offered it to her. Thank you for shaking me out of my evasions, he said with sudden seriousness. This sword isn't worth much, but I've embedded some swordplay memories in it. When you hold it, you'll find certain techniques come more naturally. Take it as a token of my gratitude. Hermione accepted the sword carefully. Lockhart's experiments with memory charms had already expanded her thinking. If memories could be stitched into steel to teach someone sword techniques, why not translate the idea to magic, injecting spells or practice into a focus so others could use complex charms more easily? It was a thought for the future. The term ended, Lockhart prepared to leave, and life at Hogwarts settled into its familiar rhythms. Only Dumbledore was left to brood quietly over the double vacancy in Slytherin and Defense Against the Dark Arts, one more of the many headaches the headmaster bore. 188. End of second-year exams for the remaining subjects arrived in quick succession. Potions was hardly a challenge for anyone. With the foundation built last summer, this year's course was comfortable for the young Gryffindors. Lily even considered quietly adjusting Harry's third-year exam questions. He'd grown a bit too pleased with himself after a few successes and needed to be put in his place. Hermione was exempted from the Transfiguration exam. For a witch who had mastered animagus, Transfiguration no longer posed practical bottlenecks. Advanced techniques can be learned step by step, limited only by practice and magical power. Professor McGonagall therefore appointed her as a temporary assistant to help proctor the other students. Harry had quietly finished the third-year material early and honed it during his excursions in the Forbidden Grounds, which impressed both Hermione and McGonagall. All he had to do now was read the fourth-year Transfiguration textbook over the summer to keep his agreement with Hermione and begin animagus training. Ron and Neville lagged a bit, but were still solid second years. Ron had stopped producing odd conjurations that made McGonagall's forehead vein twitch, and Neville no longer smashed clay pots in nervousness. If they followed Harry in studying the third-year material over the summer, they wouldn't fall far behind. To Hermione, Harry was puzzling. He hadn't inherited Lily's natural knack for potions or James's aptitude for transfiguration. His strong results in both subjects came from intensive private tutoring. What he did have, however, was an extraordinary gift for combat, an uncanny intuition, lightning reactions, and natural coordination, as if he were born for battle. If he had inherited anything from his parents, it was probably his Quidditch talent, his green eyes, and his unruly hair. In charms, Professor Flitwick proudly produced a copy of the new journal Post-War Charm Studies. Hermione's paper was published. After she demonstrated the fire-making charm, Stupefy, and the cheering charm with ease, he handed her the journal and the payment envelope and announced her grade as outstanding. Professor Sprout had been less visible these past months, but she had been indispensable to the steady growth of Hermione's perfume workshop. After all, the rise of perfumers depended on good gardens. Thanks to this year's bountiful mandrake harvest, not a single second year failed herbology. Everyone earned at least a good. Sprout took a particular liking to quiet, careful Neville and thought he would be well suited to future work with magical plants. With the seventh years about to graduate, the 4 senior students working in the perfume workshop were finally able to shift from part-time apprenticeships to full-time perfumers. They wouldn't leave the school. McGonagall allocated an empty tower for their residence. They would move from their common rooms into it, and in return for the loss of dormitory life, enjoy no curfew and access to a common room and fireplace. They could use the flu network to go home or travel freely and would receive the same treatment as other faculty and staff, though it also meant no more summer holidays and year-round work after graduation. It was the first step in Hogwarts' transformation. With fewer students each year, many parts of the castle had grown empty, and the perfume workshop's expansion promised to bring new life and roles for students who might otherwise leave. To celebrate the seniors' smooth transition, Hermione raised their wages, more than 20% above the average pay at Malfoy Manor, and taught them the Hua Hua Xiang, flower fire scent formula. That knowledge didn't require an additional Fidelius charm because its base formula derived from the inciting spray and was already protected by an earlier secrecy charm. The remaining sixth years were envious, but Hermione promised the same treatment when they graduated. She also laid out a clear reward system. In future work, she would teach more fragrance and potion formulas based on seniority and performance, and she encouraged everyone to experiment with new scent combinations. Perhaps their world could one day support many more varieties of perfumers. The perfume workshop next to the potions classroom had become a fragrant paradise in the students' imaginations. Whether because of Beauxbaton's ready payments or the visible demand for inciting spray, getting chosen as a perfumer meant a stable, well-paid post inside the safe familiarity of Hogwarts. The Beauxbaton's buyer urged them to expand every time they came, and even complained that only 4 people were working during the summer. "You're far too good to the students," someone joked. "They'll take advantage of it. Hire more people, then we'll all make more money." Lily's standards for recruitment were strict. Only a handful joined each year, and there was another selection process within the workshop. That exclusivity only fueled students' eagerness to excel in potions. Overnight, classmates became envied perfumers with high pay and invitations to Malfoy Manor, while others left school to apply for posts in noble apothecaries and endured the sniffing looks of employers. With the 7th years graduating, Professor Potter planned a new round of club recruitment next year. She would invite newly promoted students with top potions grades to join, and those who met the workshop's proficiency standards would enter the candidate list for expansion. Plans were already being made for the summer study trip. The entire Gryffindor second year, complete with a small snake, would go to the burrow. McGonagall was stunned for a long moment, but Narcissa behaved as if she'd expected it all along. Lily, on the other hand, was delighted. She hadn't been assigned students last year, but this summer she would take on many first years in addition to watching her son. If she didn't have to spend every moment looking after Harry, she could devote more energy to the newcomers, something McGonagall welcomed. Lily had no objection to Harry not receiving extra potions tutoring over the summer. She had seen his recent progress in the field. His knack for capturing Death Eaters had made her quietly proud, although she didn't show it. When she wrote to James, he was so pleased he might as well have danced through the forests of Albania. With the children heading to the burrow and Hermione keeping an eye on them, Lily was relieved. Harry's potions might slip a little next year, but his combat abilities were going to soar. McGonagall's report on his transfiguration level had Lily thinking she might need to prepare materials for her son's animagus transformation in the second half of the year. The House Cup went to Gryffindor again. Hermione had been too busy to score many points late in the year, but Harry and the team had built an unbeatable lead on the Quidditch field. At the Golden Red farewell feast, Dumbledore warned that the coming year would be difficult, but he expressed his faith that, with teachers and students united, they would overcome the challenges and see Hogwarts stand proud once more beside the Black Lake. 189, Stoke Cottage. After the annual leaving feast, Hermione and the boys traveled to the wizarding gathering place in Devon by way of the fireplaces in Professor McGonagall's office. Narcissa, still anxious, had pulled Draco aside before they left and given him a long list of instructions. Don't pick fights. If you meet danger, run and call for adults, and a dozen other cautions in the same anxious tone. The name Ottery St. Catchpole was awkward to say. Aside from the Weasleys, the Lovegoods and the Diggories lived here too. Everyone was old acquaintances, and the families planned to see each other often that summer. Children, welcome to the Weasleys' stronghold on the hill. This summer won't disappoint you. Mr. Weasley was already waiting, greeting them with a broad smile. Hermione stepped out of the fireplace. Like Godric's Hollow, the fireplaces here were set into public facilities rather than indoor chimneys. She looked out and found herself on a steep hillside. Below, caves had been carved into the scaly rock face, scattered like pinpricks of light, linked by winding mountain paths. People walked in 2s and 3s on the dirt roads. At the foot of the slope, high wooden palisades guarded the access to the mountain track. Several cairns, their surfaces etched with unmistakable traces of magic, had banners stuck into them that bore rune-like symbols and fluttered in the breeze. Watchtowers smoked with bonfires, people patrolling inside. Higher up, where the incline flattened out, small, oddly shaped houses clustered, unmistakably wizarding dwellings. Only magic could have allowed such improbable construction. Hermione felt a little disoriented. The lower half of the settlement clearly belonged to Muggles and resembled the sort of cave-dwelling communities she had seen in childhood, dugouts for sheltering from storms and predators, fortified to ward off human raiders. The Devon climate was far kinder than those bleak places, though. Despite the steep slopes, people here could live above ground most of the time. From the hilltop, she could even see the coastline as a thin silver line on the horizon. White Mountain Village? Hermione muttered, puzzled by the alternate name, and shifted to make room for those behind her. Oh, that's just another name for Ottery St. Catchpole, Ron explained as they walked ahead. White Mountain sounds easier to say. It's only about a decade old, formed when a few wizarding families gathered the villagers from the original Ottery St. Catchpole at the foot of the hill, plus some displaced folk. He sounded proud. Even though it hasn't been around for ages like Godric's Hollow, Dad and Mum put everything together themselves, bit by bit. Ron had watched the place change since he was a child and wore his belonging to it like a badge. One after another, Percy, the twins, Ginny, Harry, Neville, and Draco came through the fireplace. The newcomers looked about with curious eyes. Draco, nervous and formal, gave Mr. Weasley a small bow. "Mr. Weasley, it's a pleasure to meet you." Arthur Weasley looked a little awkward facing the son of his old rival. The boy was down on his luck, alone and uncertain. Arthur couldn't be cold. He smiled and nodded. "Mrs. Lamaubuton's already here. She's prepared licorice wands and jelly slugs for you lot. Come on, let's get up the hill. It's still chilly down here at night." Ron explained as they walked why the settlement seemed divided. The lower slopes were Muggle territory. The upper reaches were dotted with a few wizarding families' houses. Hermione asked quietly why they didn't live mixed together. Ron shrugged. The Muggles were friendly enough, but also wary and over-polite around wizards, behaving almost like servants. That made the wizards uncomfortable. Over time, the two groups had slipped into an unspoken arrangement. Muggles below, wizards above. Wizards could build whatever strange houses they liked and had ways of coping with rough weather. Muggles, who had to carve caves into the rock, couldn't sustain a scattering of surface homes. The caves the wizards had opened for them weren't as miserable inside as they looked from the outside. There was furniture and space, but the social separation was clear. "What do you eat? I don't see fields," Hermione asked as they climbed. "They're on the far side, the warmer side of the mountain," Ron said. "There isn't much flat land, though." The Weasleys' place sat on a ridge that cut the sea wind diagonally, leaving one side damp and mild for farming while people lived on the drier slopes. They continued upward. Arthur greeted several people along the way. The Muggles, just as Ron had said, bowed and answered with timid respect, not ever treating wizards as equals. Even a kind, open man like Mr. Weasley couldn't change that. This community had only existed for a little over 10 years. Many of the Muggles here had their own impressions of wizards from previous encounters, and their deference was already ingrained in the next generation. The atmosphere was far different from Godric's Hollow, where Muggles and wizards sometimes managed friendships. Here the two groups moved in separate orbits, a division that even the well-meaning members of the Order of the Phoenix must have struggled to bridge. Dumbledore, if he'd seen it, would likely have been puzzled and saddened. Mr. Diggory and Cedric soon caught up, followed by Mr. Lovegood and Luna. The three families had arranged a joint family dinner in a few days. The path flattened at last, branching to the oddly shaped houses that sprouted from the slope like bamboo shoots. The Weasleys' burrow rose in its familiar crooked stack of rooms, as if it had been built by throwing boxes on top of one another and hoping for the best. Hermione could tell by the mismatched angles how many times Mr. Weasley had added a new room. It disregarded every rule of architecture and yet looked impossibly stable. The wind couldn't rattle it. Warm light and laughter spilled from the windows. "Huh? Bill's back too?" Percy said on noticing a figure. Yes, and Charlie'll be home too in a bit. The house will be noisy this year, Mr. Weasley said, beaming. Hermione knew Charlie Weasley worked with dragons at Mount Vesuvius, but Bill she only knew vaguely. What's Bill doing? She asked. Off in Egypt, mucking about with Pharaoh's curses, Ron said, rolling his eyes. Says he wants to study them and find ways to break goblin curses. Ron scoffed, but Bill had been an outstanding student, so such ambitions weren't completely out of character. 190. No shabby place. In the years after the war, many brilliant wizards had tried to unravel the goblin's curse. It behaved unlike ordinary nuclear radiation. It clung to radioactive dust in ways magic could not explain, and it propagated itself, spreading by its own momentum. As the goblin's greatest creation, the winter friendship curse was baffling. Its lethality to wizards was relatively low, apparently designed to emphasize its tenacity and self-replication, but its damage to the environment was devastating. Back then, the goblins had seemed intent on destroying the real world. After more than 20 years and countless failed attempts, most wizards abandoned the hope of breaking the curse and turned instead to cleaning up the radiation. That is why the top journal Post-War Curse Research regarded shining stone magic so highly. The Giza Pyramid complex in Cairo, where Bill had gone, had become a gathering place for the last small group of wizards still determined to conquer the goblins' work. The curse was too ancient and profound. Their only chance was to study similar phenomena in those almost mythical ruins. The ancient Celts, Babylonians, Greeks, of course, the Egyptian curses in the pyramids were the most famous, although so far they had yielded no solutions. Because so many people had arrived at the burrow, Mr. Weasley had expanded the kitchen in advance. A large round table now seated everyone. The children had already eaten, so Molly and Augusta had prepared a spread of snacks and fruit teas, and everyone sat down for a tea party. Bill looked cool and composed, tall and lean. His trademark Weasley red hair was tied back in a ponytail, and an oddly shaped earring swung from one ear like a little golden fan. He said it had been a burial object from the pyramids. He'd personally removed the curse from it. Augusta Longbottom, the stern old woman who had heard about the three children capturing the Death Eaters, sat beside him. Dumbledore's apology letter to the Longbottoms had been intercepted by her, and she had declared it perfectly proper. The Longbottoms deserved such descendants. After listening intently to Ron's account of how the four children defeated Electo, she patted Neville's shoulder with great vigor, praising him for cutting through the shield charm with a sword and severing the wand-holding hand. Neville, already chubby and red-faced, blushed with pride. She also, rarely, praised Draco. "Child, you have done well. Don't disgrace the name Malfoy," she told him, and his eyes went a little wet. Augusta was of an older generation. Few ancient surnames remained to her, and she grew sentimental. Her old prejudices against the Malfoys had softened. There was only one child left after all. She thanked Hermione in particular. Hermione had thrown herself into tutoring her grandson and had loaded Augusta's plate with jelly and pudding. Grandmothers loved to feed children, and Hermione never refused food. The two of them were already fond of each other. The Weasleys had no quarrel with Dumbledore's recent actions. Molly was relieved to see the improvement in her least promising son. With so many children and so much to do in their small, newly established settlement, the family had little time to fuss over every child. The eldest and second eldest had always been exceptional. Percy, the third, was rigid and not exactly recognizable as a Weasley in temperament, yet he never caused serious trouble. The twins infuriated their eldest brother but kept their grades high. Ginny, their only daughter, had shown remarkable promise even before starting school. Only Ron, the youngest son, had always seemed ordinary, good at wizard chess perhaps, but nothing spectacular in a house full of talents. Life in White Mountain Village kept wizards busy. Molly would joke that she wished she could split herself into 8. People asked if any pre-wed daughters remained for marriage, but Mrs. Weasley's 2 brothers had died fighting the Green Flame Party that year. Heroic, but they left no other active family members. The pre-weds were effectively gone. George and Fred did not stay long at the table. They ran off to their room, already tinkering. Mrs. Weasley called up the stairs a few times after hearing clanging and strange noises. Mr. Weasley, curious about Ginny's weird gun barrel wand, picked it up and began swinging it about. A series of popping gunshots rang out, sending the ghouls in the attic into a flurry. As night deepened, the children grew sleepy. "Sleep well tonight. Tomorrow, Ron will show you around the village," Molly arranged. "We'll help where we can." Hermione could see that in this tiny, newly built community, there was always work to be done. The adults might not have much energy to spare for their guests. She worried that Ron had already been helping so much at home and didn't want their arrival to be a burden. "Oh, what a sensible girl," Molly sighed and hugged Hermione. "Tomorrow we can go see the cotton fields, and I'll take you to catch goblins." Ron put up his hand eagerly, the sort of boast he'd made since childhood. Mrs. Weasley had prepared rooms for everyone. Mr. Weasley's expansion had been effective. Although Hermione offered to share with Ginny, there was a spare room set aside for each newcomer. Ron's room was exactly as one would expect. An old bed with rumpled quilts embroidered with Quidditch motifs, a fish tank with water plants but no fish, left untouched since Christmas, as if Mrs. Weasley hadn't managed to tidy that one corner. Hermione's own room was on the third-floor landing, right next to Ginny's, and then the twins'. It wasn't large, but it had good light, and Mrs. Weasley had washed her bedclothes carefully until they smelled faintly of lavender. From upstairs came the sounds of boys roughhousing. Percy shouted himself hoarse, while the twins answered back without a hint of ceremony. Hermione flopped onto the soft bed and listened to the small house. The occasional shriek of a ghoul, Ginny humming cheerfully, Mrs. Longbottom and Mrs. Weasley speaking in low, companionable tones downstairs. Everything felt right. It was a different kind of home than Hogwarts, quieter and warmer. Home, how good it felt. Early the next morning, the children were already up. Having adjusted to the school routine, it was hard to sleep in, even during the summer holidays. Arthur and Molly weren't there. They had gone out early to attend to matters. Only the housekeeper, an elderly woman called Mrs. Longbottom, was in the kitchen. She had laid out a large breakfast and called the children to eat. "I'm going to Mr. Lovegood's later," Bill mumbled with his mouth full of sandwiches. "He said the Quibbler wants to interview us about our progress. Ronnie, will you look after your friends? If you have any problems, go find Percy. He'll be home all day." "Hey, we'll be home too," George protested. "Why only Percy?" Fred clapped Harry and Neville on the shoulder. "Come to our room tonight. We'll show you some good stuff." The boys exchanged glances as if planning a secret operation. After breakfast, they got ready to go out. Mrs. Longbottom reminded everyone to come back for lunch. She had stewed some rather rare venison soup. The burrow by daylight felt different than at night. A little light filtered down through the dark green clouds, giving the sky a hazy brightness. Mr. Weasley was busy in the shed, surrounded by all manner of Muggle contraptions, abandoned car parts, an exaggerated tank wreck, and massive steam tanks. He seemed to be piecing things together in his own way. "Dad always invents strange things," Ron explained. "He tries to make Muggles' machinery run on its own to help with plowing or transporting supplies." "Where's Mrs. Weasley?" Hermione asked, watching Arthur at work. "Mom's over at the potions workshop with Aunt Pandora. There's work there every day." The Weasley stronghold wasn't like places that had a resident potions master. Even with several witches skilled at potions, it took a lot of effort to meet everyone's needs. Headaches, fevers, broken legs, failing crops, all required potions. Some magical illnesses were especially difficult, like radiation-induced dragon pox, which tormented older wizards. They used a lot of anti-radiation potion, but production was limited by raw materials. Even when witches helped in their spare time, it wasn't enough. Many Muggles, when sick, could only tough it out. Potions were too precious and had to be saved for critical moments. "Stay in the stronghold. Don't wander off. There have been werewolves about lately," Mr. Weasley called loudly as he worked. They split up at the Lovegoods' doorstep. Xenophilius Lovegood's house was a charming black cylinder with 3 hand-painted signs nailed to the crooked garden gate. "The Quibbler. Editor. X Lovegood. Please pick your own mistletoe. Don't touch the dirigible plums." Hermione saw many strange magical plants growing in the fenced yard. Luna was tending them and waved cheerfully at the group, though her eyes still looked a little unfocused. "Want to come to the fields with us?" Ginny called. "No, I have to look after these dirigible plums. I haven't seen them for months, and they miss me very much, Luna said in her ethereal voice. Bill was welcomed into the house by Xenophilius, and Hermione heard the clatter of what was likely the Quibbler's printing press inside. They passed the Diggory's house next. It was the most conventional-looking building in the area, but the family seemed to be out. Led by Ron, the six of them followed a footpath down from the pea patches and rounded to the back of Badger's burrow. The terrain was rugged here, rocks knobbly and sharp like the scales of an ancient dead dragon. After a few turns, they entered a hidden valley, a small, lush green hollow with terraced fields and Muggles already at work. That half is oats. Further down are soybeans and vegetables, and the ones above are sugar beets, Ron said, pointing matter-of-factly. Hermione noticed many rusty bicycles rolling on their own between the rows. They had large water buckets hanging from them and were modified steam tanks, all mixed with diluted anti-radiation potion. The Muggles shouted directions, but the bicycles weren't especially obedient. Only wizards could command transfiguration creations freely. Sometimes a bicycle would veer off course, and someone would have to reel it back. It's a pity the area is so small. We'll trade these high-quality crops for a larger quantity of lower-grade grain so everyone can be sure to eat their fill, Ron continued. They weren't like Malfoy Manor, where a bevy of wizards maintained massive domes producing surplus food and exporting everywhere. This half's flax and cotton, but cotton needs too much sun, so yields aren't great. We have to rely on wizards to light them with lumos often. In this small valley, every plant got meticulous care. The Muggles checked each leaf daily for pests or disease. Wizards handled what the Muggles couldn't: light, temperature, rain. And we have to catch these annoying gnomes, Ron said, stomping on a potato-sized creature, trying to sneak out of the cotton and swinging it by its tail before tossing it away. They tunnel underground and eat roots. Muggles find them hard to spot, so it's usually up to us kids. It's a shame Badger's burrow doesn't have digging ferrets. They'd save us a lot of trouble, he added. Besides gnomes, Kneazles cause trouble too. Muggles often mistake them for hedgehogs and feed them, which actually angers the Kneazles and makes them wreck the garden, he went on, pointing to an area higher up the hollow, enclosed by a fence and topped with a translucent glass greenhouse. Many magical plants for potions are grown in there. We have to make sure Kneazles don't get in. So our job today is to drive them out? Harry asked, intrigued. He had never seen a cotton field before. Ginny, you learned Lumos this year too, so you'll be in charge of lighting the cotton. Make it as close to sunlight as you can, Ron instructed. And for Kneazles and gnomes, stupefy is the most convenient, he told Harry, then raised an eyebrow at Draco. Want to make a contest of it, see who catches the most? Of course, Draco snapped, showing no reluctance. This year he'd slipped to 5th in his year, with gaps opening in defense against the dark arts, potions, and transfiguration, so he was eager to prove himself. Hermione agreed to act as referee. She and Ginny lit the cotton together, suspending their wands with levitation charms and casting cushioning charms so they hovered like small suns above the rows, while also keeping score for the boys. The working Muggles kept a respectful distance. They avoided the area where the wizards were casting spells, saying they didn't want to disturb them. They watched silently as the children worked and played at once, two different worlds observing each other. 192. Don't look at the moon. After a busy morning, they finally managed to deal with all the goblins and Kneazles they could find. Harry won again. His eyesight gave him a real advantage in the contest, letting him pick out the small monsters that blended with the soil. With a large sack of Kneazle spines over their shoulders, they returned to the burrow for a hearty venison stew. In the afternoon, they went to the potions workshop. Kneazle spines were a valued ingredient, and since few witches and wizards wanted to waste time catching them, their price ran high. The children were already proficient at making anti-radiation potions, so helping the ants in the workshop was straightforward. Hermione met almost every wizard's wife in the settlement while they chatted about daily life and worked, fingers constantly busy processing ingredients. They weren't as efficient or precise as Lily, and none of them had any secret tricks, but they were generally very skilled. For the difficult brews, they had to confer and work together. The ordinary ones were easy. Pandora Lovegood was in charge here. Luna had inherited nearly all of her good qualities, and almost everyone who met Pandora praised how lucky Xenophilius was. Despite his eccentricities, he clearly won a remarkable woman's heart. Mrs. Lovegood was a powerful witch, adept at inscribing charms with runes. The banners placed on the stone piles around the settlement were her work and gave the village strong protection. The word, runes, here matched the name used in the Forbidden Land, though the meaning in the two worlds differed slightly. In both, it signified a deep understanding of rules and ancient knowledge. When Hermione had been a finger maiden, she had been very skilled at using runes to enhance the tarnished, but the runes of this world took a different form and couldn't be quantified or collected like those in the Forbidden Land. She didn't yet know how to apply them here. Perhaps if she ever obtained a great rune, she could study the subject properly. Conveniently, when the summer holiday ended and she entered her 3rd year, she would be able to take runes as an elective. Seeing her interest, Pandora gave Hermione a copy of Simple Introduction to Ancient Runes, a very suitable beginner's book. With the children helping, the women finished the day's work quickly, even processing the Kneazle spines. It wasn't because there was no work left, but because they'd run out of materials. No matter how industrious you are, a clever housewife can't cook without rice. Some of the women left to manage household chores, others had errands elsewhere. Mrs. Weasley had to tend the magical plant garden on the mountain's back slope. Many delicate plants needed attention several times a day, and Mrs. Lovegood had to maintain the runic banners around the settlement. There was endless work for every wizard. Muggles were as fragile as reeds and needed constant care. The adults didn't give the children chores, so after dinner, Harry and the others decided to practice magic on the gentle slope at the top of the mountain. Since leaving school, they had been without a meditation basin, and the lack left them oddly uncomfortable. Hermione, who had been struggling to fit into the peaceful rhythm of the settlement, felt a little of the Forbidden Land's trauma creep back in. They needed to move their hands every day. Without that, they grew restless and hypervigilant. Even at the Burrow, the Weasley twins' pranks and sneak attacks, relying on home advantage, never caught them off guard. "We still haven't cleared the underground of Stormvale Castle," Harry complained. "What was that terrifying human face? We only saw it for a moment. That rotten tree spirit, its size made it hard for us to handle," said Ron. "But since it's wood, it should fear fire. Maybe next time we try burning it." They hadn't lasted long enough to see it reach the fire-breathing stage the last time. "If you want to attempt animagus when school starts, Harry, you should practice transfiguration well this summer," Hermione reminded him. "If you can't satisfy Professor McGonagall and Professor Potter, you won't get anywhere." Harry nodded. One good thing about the Weasley home was that it held Bill's and Charlie's old textbooks, and they were much easier to borrow than Percy's. Harry could read through old 4th-year transfiguration books and notes freely. They were far more useful than the twins' clean but sparse textbooks. Word of Hermione's special training had drawn George and Fred, and even Percy had come along. This mountain ledge had been the children's secret base since they were little, a natural recess in the rock with stone tables and chairs and a leeward campfire that let them stay as long as they brought a bit of food. The 4 who wanted to make an animagus breakthrough borrowed the textbooks of Bill, Charlie, and the twins. Each had a copy and practiced with furrowed brows while reading. George and Fred sat at a table muttering spells over a pile of small gadgets, tinkering with whatever new mischief they were inventing. The exploding snap they'd bought in Beauxbaton's last year hadn't been put into use during the holiday. Sometimes a dud firecracker was the most frightening thing of all. Percy, who would be a 7th year next year and already expected to be head boy, felt his authority growing. Still, Hermione's presence reminded him of how far he had to go, so he was sharpening his practical combat and defense against the dark arts skills. Hermione, however, did not stay on the ground. She rose into the air in her Otsukimi form, xenon argon and hazy, and the intensely bright moonlight she radiated bathed everyone. The glow enhanced the surrounding magic realm, speeding everyone's progress and allowing her to analyze the Forbidden Land's magic more quickly and compare it with this world's laws. The moon form was now noticeably larger than when she had first completed the transformation. As her power grew, the moon grew stronger. She could feel it could become bigger, brighter, and rise even higher. If she wanted, she could bring the whole of White Mountain Village into its light. In that form, her body brimmed with active magical energy, growing rapidly like a newborn. Still, Hermione felt this growth wasn't yet perfect. Something seemed missing, holding the moon back. There was no experience in either world to guide her on this, so she had to take it step by step. Even so, at the current rate, the moon should reach its present limit in less than half a year. Everyone was amazed by her moon transformation, but agreed to keep it a children's secret. Hermione, however, wasn't overly concerned. She already planned to eventually include the whole school within her magic realm. As she grew stronger and her status rose, more people would take notice. Some things didn't need to be hidden forever. Around 9 o'clock, Ginny and Luna arrived hand in hand. "We brought a friend. She's a Muggle. Hope that's okay," Luna began softly. Before she could finish, the xenon argon full moon on the mountain wall caught the newcomer's eye. The Muggle girl's pupils suddenly went wide and fixed, and a horrified shriek rose from her throat as hair began to sprout from her body. "Oh no!" A faint werewolf howl echoed across the mountaintop. Ginny didn't hesitate. She tackled Luna to the ground. Behind them, the Muggle girl convulsed and shrank into a short, hunched werewolf, lunging blindly forward. Then 4 or 5 binding charms shot out from every direction and pinned her in place. The best of the Gryffindor students had gathered here. A young werewolf stood little chance of hurting them. "Ginny, what's going on?" Percy sprang to his feet, voice sharp. "When did a werewolf get into our village?" Ginny hauled Luna up, still shaken, and said, "Maria was infected at the beginning of the year. You just never bothered to notice." Luna stared at the bound beast with a sad expression. The werewolf kept struggling, but the magic held. "It was that roaming pack of werewolves," she said. "Maria's father gave his life to buy her time. She barely escaped. For the last 6 months, we used the only 3 doses of the werewolf venom potion on her," Ginny added. "When there was nothing left, she had to lock herself in a cave and endure it." Hermione, who had been in a moon form, was now detaching from it and drifting down lightly beside the girl. "I should be the one to apologize," she said, kneeling to examine the small werewolf, who was still flicked with a little fur and had beast ears pricked up. "I didn't expect my moon form to have the same effect as a real full moon." It made a grim kind of sense. Hermione's moon was a true, magical moon, not merely an illusion, and it carried occult power. As the artificial moon faded, the girl's frenzy subsided, and the most extreme signs of transformation eased. The slow, tearing pain and exhaustion that always accompanied metamorphosis left her listless and dazed. She stared at the wizards around her with a blank, confused look. She was a pretty child, brown hair, brown eyes. Poverty had left her thin, and her linen shirt had been patched and mended so often the fabric was a collage. Even so, her skin was fair, and her nose turned up in a way that, combined with the little ears, made her look oddly endearing. Hermione rummaged through her satchel and finally found a bottle tucked at the bottom, an improved werewolf venom potion. It was one of several Lily had given her the previous summer when they'd explored Godric's Hollow. Lily's version was famous. Not only could it help a werewolf keep their mind after transforming, it had preventative properties. Taken before exposure, it could prevent infection from a bite. Used to flush a fresh wound within half an hour, it could greatly reduce the chance of contagion. Lily's refinement had gone so far that to many, it seemed to reverse the curse. Every capable household kept a bottle in case of emergency. It was the kind of potion that genuinely changed destinies. Hermione handed the precious vial to Maria. The child drank obediently. Almost immediately, color returned to her face, and the last traces of the transformation faded away. "Is that the moon?" Maria asked softly, bewilderment in her voice. Hermione blinked. Then she understood. Muggle children here had never seen the moon. Unlike magic-born children, who learned constellations in astronomy by watching enchanted projections, these Muggles had lived under a sky choked with dust and dim light all their lives. They'd learned to call the monthly change the full moon when the curse struck, but they'd never seen the real thing. Yes, Hermione replied quietly, but that one was me. I turned into it. That's the moon, Maria murmured, still in a daze. The restraints were released, and the children crowded closer. How could Dad let a werewolf stay in the village? This is dangerous. Percy scowled. Maria hasn't hurt anyone in 6 months, Ginny snapped back. She's been our friend since we were kids. You boys just never took me along for things. Luna helped Maria to her feet and brushed dust from her patched shirt. Maria's father was a leader among the Muggles, she said. Their family had a lot of respect. He used to be the go-between for wizards and Muggles here. Hermione nodded. Maria's father must have been one of the few who didn't fear wizards, who worked to keep the two communities connected. He had paid the ultimate price to protect others, and his only child had been left with a werewolf venom infection, condemned without treatment to transform every full moon. Uncle Lupin's a werewolf too, Harry said gently, but he wouldn't bite anyone. That's because Professor Potter provides him with the best werewolf venom potion, Percy grumbled, still unwilling to accept the situation. But we can't afford to give her that every month. Even brewing it ourselves takes rare ingredients, and the failure rate for that potion is high. It was true. Even the standard werewolf venom potion was difficult to brew reliably. Only experienced potion masters could do it consistently. With raw materials controlled and prices raised by places like Malfoy Manor, a steady supply of potion for one werewolf could cost as much as feeding and clothing a family for months. From a cold utilitarian point of view, keeping Maria supplied long-term made little sense, especially since she was a Muggle. In neighboring settlements, bitten people were often abandoned. The argument went that taking in someone who might one day become a danger would doom the whole village. But for the Weasleys, Maria was the orphan of a hero. The Muggles were frightened of her affliction, yes, but they also shared the sorrow of losing her father. If the wizards turned her away, the Muggles would see it as proof that they could be discarded when no longer useful. That fear would widen the gap between the communities even further. She can control herself, Ginny said fiercely. Every month she locks herself up. No one gets hurt. Maria ignored Percy and looked at Hermione with hopeful eyes. Can I see that moon again? She asked. Her voice was thin from poor food and hard living, but earnest. Hermione thought for a moment. With one of Lily's improved potions in her, even seeing the full moon and transforming wouldn't mean a loss of self. Letting Maria see it again, with the potion as a safeguard, would not hurt. She looked around at the faces clustered on the mountain, concern, fear, pity, stubborn loyalty, and made her decision. This might be the last time she saw the moon. Maria clearly couldn't afford to keep buying the werewolf venom potion, and the dust cloud overhead wasn't going to clear anytime soon. She might never see the moon properly again in her life. Hermione thought this as she curled up and floated, her body changing until she became a perfect full moon inside the nitrogen-argon mist. A cool, shimmering light spread across the ground and over everyone, as if a thin veil of moonlight had been draped on them. No matter how many times I see it, it's still so beautiful, Harry said, envious. The others watched Maria with nervous mistrust. Percy had even drawn his wand. But Lily's werewolf venom potion had worked. After Hermione transformed into the moon, Maria did begin to manifest her werewolf form, but she did not go into mindless violence, only pain. For the first time, she could see the change as it happened, a tuft of fur and a long tail growing from her back, terrible, twisted claws sprouting from her fingers. She lifted a shaking hand and let Hermione's moonlight fall across the downy fur. She raised her head toward that dreamy circle in the sky. Mom said that in the old days, the moon stood for longing, she whispered. Grandmother told her, before the green clouds covered the sky, you could see the moon every night. Sometimes it was a round plate, sometimes a graceful crescent. It watched over every child at night. Large tears spilled from her beastly eyes and tracked down her short, protruding muzzle. Mom said if you miss her, just look up. Behind the clouds, the moon is always there. She and Grandmother are there, keeping me company. Now, Dad should be there too, right? She stretched out a paw-like hand, fur blue-white in the moonlight, as if trying to touch that distant sphere. The moon was still far away. All she could do was feel the light falling on her skin, like the comfort of family. Everyone stood quietly. Even Percy, generally the most rigid, had no words. He only wanted to let the girl have this rare moment. Though Hermione, transformed into Otsukimi, had no eyes, she still possessed a strange way of sensing things around her. She watched the werewolf below with no resentment in her glow. As Maria poured out her longing and dependence into the moon, an invisible tide seemed to pour back into Hermione. In an instant, the former Finger Maiden recognized what it was: faith. She had never been adored, but she had faithfully believed in the two fingers and the supreme will. That feeling of being trusted and venerated was familiar, only now the object of that faith had shifted. It was not the two fingers but herself, the moon, and the sensation was intoxicating. The bright sphere fed a tangible thrill and deep contentment, like a long hunger finally sated. For the first time, Hermione understood why something within her had always felt empty. Though the moon was a carrion royal magic suspended in the sky, its essence was meant to be an object of people's gaze and trust, an outer presence that bound the stars and moon together. Maria's pure, childlike devotion provided the missing nourishment Hermione had never known she needed. Magic and faith braided together, accelerating Otsukimi's growth. But painfully, Hermione knew this intake was small. One child's faith might comfort her, but it was hardly enough to change her form in any lasting way. And without a steady supply of werewolf venom potion, Maria herself wouldn't be able to gaze clearly at the moon again, much less keep giving that faith. A thought struck Hermione, the kind that made her heart skip. In the Forbidden Land, people didn't use werewolf the way others did. They called all beast-like sapients misbegotten, a low servant race born of the crucible of life. Their strength and cunning were still formidable. The fingers sent beings called shadows to Empyreans, most of them wolf-like misbegotten, who served as both bodyguards and wardens. Blade the half-wolf belonged to Nye, Malekith the Black Blade to Marika. There had been the former Beast King, born by Godfrey, to temper his own warlike spirit. Later Serosh, Lord of Beasts, and even the golden-maned lion Misbegotten, who could manifest the Golden Order. The Forbidden Land had methods for beasts to gain reason. The bestial sanctums bound beastmen statues, and the mummified beastmen, fixed to stone pillars in crumbling Farum Azula, all spoke of bestiality restrained by intelligence. Could that intelligence arise not as a natural inheritance, but from faith? The idea itself sparked through her mind. These creatures believed in great things, the ancient dragons, the Golden Order, and through that devotion, they suppressed their feral natures and became sentient. Blade, who went mad when he abandoned faith, seemed to prove it. Losing belief unraveled him. Werewolves in this world were born under a curse that no potion could lift, only delay. But perhaps, Hermione thought, faith could cage the frenzy from another angle. If a beast entrusted its heart to something steadfast, could that trust steady it? Her decision was sudden. She looked down at the little werewolf, bathed in cold light. "If you still want to see the moon again," she said, her voice spreading like soft light, "then have faith in me." It was a whisper, intimate and low. In Maria's eyes, the moon itself seemed to be speaking to her. The light swelled, warm and white, and felt like an embrace. "Entrust your heart, your uncontrollable fury, your longing. Give it to the moon, to me." In the glow, a hand seemed to reach from the moon, fingers pale and gentle against Maria's cheek, brushing away the tear stains as a mother might. "Faith, in the moon?" Maria murmured, unsure what the word meant or how to practice it. She took an awkward half-step, half-kneeling, and looked up at the luminous orb. "I will give everything I have, my heart, my love, to the moon, to you." She stretched her clawed hand as if to take the hand that reached down. In the next heartbeat, an invisible pact clicked into place. Moonlight blossomed and silvered everything. Hermione felt the connection form between them. She sensed Maria's sadness, the rage the potion suppressed, and that dependent, puppyish cling to Lord Voldemort beneath it all. Shadow Beast. The term surfaced in Hermione's mind, clear and inevitable. Perhaps from now on, Maria would be her Shadow Beast. 195. Wolf Girl Under the Moon. The children didn't tell the adults about Maria. Explaining Hermione's nightly transformation into the moon would have been too complicated, and Mr. Weasley had never intended to expel Maria anyway, so it was simpler to pretend the whole incident never happened. Besides, none of them could fully understand what Hermione had done. The words had been sent straight into the young werewolf's heart, inaudible to anyone else. Hermione seemed to have muttered to the moon for a while, then raised her hand and released a sudden, dazzling light. Because Maria had taken the werewolf venom potion first, even Hermione couldn't be absolutely certain whether faith alone could hold back bestial fury. While the potion's effect lasts, for another week, I will become the moon every night, Hermione told Maria. You must stay in the moonlight the whole time. As the potion wears off, you will feel more and more agitated, but you must surrender your body and mind to the moon without reservation. Let the moon carry that heat for you. Hermione regarded the timid girl. If you can hold your anger under the moonlight without hurting anyone, you can be the first werewolf who no longer needs the potion and live here with everyone like normal. Maria brightened at that and nodded again and again, promising she could do it. Percy was skeptical, but Hermione was on the board of governors at Hogwarts, a much higher position than his as an aspiring student council president, so he kept his objections to himself. In the days that followed, the children split their time between helping around the stronghold by day and gathering in a sequestered hollow in the hills by night. Hermione used transfiguration to raise a stone wall, a high barrier that separated Maria from the others. It was reckless to let a full-moon werewolf stay among the group until they were sure she could remain sane. Basic precautions were necessary. Under the Otskimi moonlight, Maria stayed in her wolf form. As the potion's influence faded, she grew progressively more agitated. The others kept busy with their own tasks, but all of them kept one eye on the other side of the wall. Hermione opened a small window so Ginny and Luna could speak through and try to help Maria hold on to her reason. "Are those rogue werewolves still around here?" Ginny asked. "Mr. Weasley sent people out to look, but they only found some fur. Who knows where they've gone?" Maria replied, as coherently as she could while remaining in wolf form, one hand raking into the stone, leaving deep claw marks. "The stronghold's wards will keep them out," Percy said, frowning. "But it's too dangerous for Muggles to go out now. Even for wizards, facing a pack of werewolves is perilous." White Mountain's relatively untouched environment meant Muggles sometimes went out in groups to scavenge supplies, or traveled on to Exeter and Plymouth for scrap machinery, seeds, ironware, and the like. Because of the hidden pack, those trips had been impossible for half a year, and wizards had to escort every foray, stretching their resources thin. Maybe Hermione could become the moon and fly around outside. Those wolves would come running, Ron blurted. Neville was sparring with Draco nearby. Without using anything like the Cruciatus curse, the young Slytherin was no match. After Hermione let Neville try on Lockhart's sword a few times, he seemed to learn swordsmanship overnight. His scabbard, with a mercury core that could disrupt spells and act like a wand, made his blade unusually dangerous. He had also learned to flick out a Carrion Swiftblade from the guard, extending his reach and making his attacks hard to read. Draco could only hope to keep his distance. Harry, following Hermione's example from the previous semester, had begun practical exercises in transforming living creatures. He lacked Hermione's precise control. Even with intense daily study of transfiguration, he couldn't match her pace and had to make up for lesser talent with harder work. Hermione suspected her transmigration had been like a rebirth, her own faith-gifted talent layered on top of the original girl's wizarding aptitude, explaining how quickly she learned things. "Werewolves seem to communicate with long howls," George was saying as he tinkered with some device. "Maybe we can find them through Maria," Fred added. "If those wolves are trying to bite people instead of kill them, they probably want to swell their numbers. They often wait until the bitten person is shunned by their community and turns, then follow the inaudible howls to find them. And I heard that in some packs, Muggle werewolves are little more than servants to wizard werewolves," Ron supplied. Ginny's face hardened. "That's too risky. Maria's only 12. She can't do magic. Sending such a child to infiltrate a pack, if anything went wrong, she couldn't possibly defend herself." "I'll try," Maria said softly. "Those werewolves killed Dad." The word ignited something inside her. Hermione, still in her moon form, lowered her gaze. Control yourself, Hermione soothed. Maria obeyed, closing her eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the moonlight take her anger. The faith link worked. As the potion's force faded, the moon's presence could gradually replace it, helping Maria keep her reason. If Maria insists, she needs to at least learn to transform and control her werewolf body, Percy said pragmatically. Then she'll be able to run faster if she needs to. Dad taught me martial arts and how to use guns, Maria said. As a Muggle surviving in these times, she'd learned to rely on physical skills. Percy snorted. Muggle martial arts and firearms were a joke compared to magic. Even a simple levitation charm was a world apart. And for a wolf with superhuman strength and regeneration, bullets were hardly decisive. Hermione's thoughts wandered. Shadow beasts often carried a fragment of the power of their masters. Blade's royal greatsword carried Nye's cold of snow magic. Malekith had been commanded by Marika to guard a great weapon, destined death, the remnant of rule-stripped power from the Elden Ring. If Maria had become someone's shadow beast, might she share part of that power? Could a Muggle girl suddenly possess strange talents, latent magical ability, or a connection to something like the Philosopher's Stone, or some power of the moon? Even if none of that were true, a Muggle who had awakened a faith attribute might be able to cast incantations through faith alone. Many of the beast clergyman's rites required belief more than intellect. Hermione looked at Maria and said, "If you want to become stronger, perhaps I can teach you something special." 196. The Wisdom of the Beast. It turned out Maria really had gained some power from Hermione, but perhaps because Otsukimi was still only in its initial form, and Hermione was not like Nyi or Marika, who were gods and had mastered particular laws, the power she could pass on to the little werewolf was very limited. A thin, nebulous veil of something like xenon dust clung to Maria's body. Tests showed it could strengthen her claws and teeth a little, improve her resistance to blows, and make her body a bit tougher. Hermione tried teaching her levitation and little shining stone spells, but there was no response. Maria seemed to have acquired a new extraordinary ability, but she had no talent for conventional magic, not even for starlight, which required the least magical power. Hermione suspected that only when she herself mastered a particular magic to a certain level or fully understood a certain rule could she share a greater portion of power with Maria. She knew a lot now, but she was not specialized the way Nyi had been. Nyi had done deep research into cold magic before she became a god, and her unique dark moon was a blend of cold and lunar power. That made Hermione even more curious about what the next stage of her own moon form might bring. There was no second dark moon in this world for her to witness, and because she hadn't concentrated on one branch of magic, she had developed broadly in everything she could study. With the world's unusual magic system, she suspected further changes awaited. Since she couldn't share much more power with the little werewolf, she turned to prayer. Releasing prayers had to be linked to a sacred mark. Maria couldn't copy the claw-shaped sacred mark of the beast priest Garank. That mark represented Garank's own fury and was tied to him. Having just read A Beginner's Guide to Ancient Runes, Hermione took inspiration and designed a mark of her own, a hazy moon with a small wolf's head howling beneath it. She crafted it from pure silver and hung it on a fine chain so it could be worn around the neck or wrapped around the hand. Silver didn't cost much. She asked Mr. Weasley to fetch the metal when he was out. Although the idea that werewolves are universally afraid of silver is a Muggle superstition, there was some truth to silver in this world. Combined with dittany, it could help heal werewolf bite wounds. Otherwise, those wounds would not close and would keep bleeding. A silver sacred mark could, to a degree, suppress the werewolf's cursed blood and help her hold on to her sanity. Maria's level of education was very low. White Mountain Village had only managed to teach most Muggles to recognize letters. Teaching her to concentrate and to pray would be hard. Hermione borrowed Lockhart's style of solution and used a memory charm to implant the method for invoking the Beast Stone prayer into the pendant. Beast Stone was a prayer that quickly summoned and launched a mass of sharp stone fragments. Beast-class prayers had very low requirements for an attribute called faith. In the old lore, before the era of the Golden Tree, Stones had been the first weapons used by beasts that gained wisdom. If Maria held the mark and prayed, she could instantly activate the Beast Stone prayer, which would compensate for her lack of ranged attacks. The Beast Stone itself symbolized the initial wisdom beasts gained, so it might also help restrain her savagery. On the first try, the Muggle girl succeeded. Sharp stone shards rose from the ground and shot outward in a scatter, embedding themselves several centimeters into the rock wall with clear force. The tips of the shards glimmered with a little moon dust, making them more powerful than the originals used in the Forbidden Land. Maria looked at her claws, trembling with excitement. This was power beyond a Muggle's. She didn't have to secretly envy her younger sisters any longer. She could do it too. Of course, this early manifestation was really just a training aid. After all, it wasn't Maria's own power. Hermione promised that once Maria could release Beast Stone without the implanted memory charm, she would teach her more prayers. But the essence of prayer is to request power from the object of faith, and Hermione herself did not possess beast power. In truth, Maria was still drawing on her own werewolf nature. The moon only suppressed or mobilized it. If Hermione wanted to teach Maria a flame prayer later, Hermione would first need to master the law of fire herself. She couldn't just send a ghost owl to a distant fire god in the Forbidden Land and shamelessly beg for power. Hermione guessed that, given the stubborn, potent blood curse of werewolves, most beast prayers would be within Maria's capability. If her beast power were exhausted, Hermione could use her own magic to recharge her as the faith source, creating a kind of alternating continuous supply. Imagine a werewolf granted beast strength and beast vigor, tenacious, nearly unkillable, wounds that closed quickly, claws that could release air blades several meters long, and the ability to hurl boulders faster than cannonballs. Wouldn't that make an ideal human shield against traditional wizards? Hermione painted this prospect for Maria, dangling the promise like a carrot. It worked. Maria threw herself into learning about faith and prayer. Allowing Muggles to gain limited spellcasting ability was a major breakthrough, but because of Maria's cursed nature, Hermione didn't want to publicize it. Instead, she quietly found a few trustworthy Muggles in the village and had them try holding the sacred mark. Nothing happened. Even though Hermione showed them Otskimi and awed them, simple Muggle faith alone could not activate the prayer. Maybe only those with a certain extraordinary quality can use prayers, Hermione mused. That made sense. Given the fanaticism of some Christian Muggles, if such phenomena could be triggered generally, wizards might already have been wiped out. Still, it was a breakthrough. At least other Muggles who became werewolves did not automatically gain spellcasting. If in the future, there proved to be a safer way with fewer side effects to give ordinary people a weak, extraordinary quality, perhaps the gap between wizards and Muggles could be narrowed through prayer. Even if the method remained risky, some people might accept being bitten by a werewolf in exchange for gaining spellcasting. The biggest difference between Muggles and wizards is exactly this. Hermione, however, did not want a world full of werewolves. For now, it was better that this means of giving ordinary people limited extraordinary power remain known only on a very small scale. When the boys saw Maria transform from Muggle into spellcaster, they were eager to try. They borrowed the Wolf Moon pendant and attempted to replicate the Beast Stone prayer from the memory Hermione had implanted. But they were merely Hermione's classmates. None of them regarded her as an object of faith, so they couldn't activate the prayer. Does it have to be faith? Can't we do it just because we're good friends? Ron asked, disappointed. You don't have beast power in your bodies, Hermione replied helplessly. Even if you believe in me, you can't release Beast Stone. Whether it was the source of power or the attribute of faith, the little wizards didn't possess what was needed. Still, Hermione wondered privately, if there were wizards who devoutly believed in her, could they release high-level shining stone magic through prayer? Could ordinary people, by sincere faith, be allowed to call forth the full moon in the form of a prayer? The question lingered in her thoughts like moonlight on water. 197. What is faith? Putting thoughts of the distant future aside, Hermione seemed to have rediscovered the curiosity and research-mindedness she'd had when she first arrived at Hogwarts. With Bill and Charlie's old textbooks, she finally read through the entire 7-year curriculum. In her Otsukimi trance, she analyzed spells quickly and absorbed them. With a little practice, she was hardly different from an adult wizard. Apparition, however, was best practiced back at school under Professor McGonagall's guidance. The burrow had once been spatially chaotic from wizards carelessly discarding portkeys. Although it had improved greatly, it was still unwise for beginners to try apparition casually. In any case, Hermione no longer urgently needed apparition. Among the magic sent from the Land of Shadow by the Tarnished was a shining stone spell called Miriam's Vanishing, which let the caster turn into a mist of shining stone for a short dash before reappearing. It didn't cover long distances like apparition, but it was more than enough for combat. Hermione could even blink back and forth against Lockhart in practice, competing to see who would be caught first. She had decided to leave the roaming werewolf pack for later. Maria needed time to train, so Maria began sparring with Harry and the others. With a beast's physique, powerful beast stones, and straightforward fighting techniques, the young werewolf showed real suppressive ability. But Harry's combat talent was overwhelming. In a head-on close-quarters fight, Maria stood little chance. No matter how tough she was, she couldn't afford to let Harry's flail touch her even once, and the beast stones, which were not very precise, couldn't hit the agile boy. His transfiguration had also improved a great deal, giving him a wide variety of tactical options. Ron's defense was even more solid, like a turtle shell. Maria tried everything, but couldn't break through. Ron's increasingly skilled shield counter would seize an opening, knock her off balance, and pin her with a series of binding and petrification curses. Neville fought back and forth with Maria, sword against claw. Both were cautious and tried to dodge, but Neville's greater variety of magic created all sorts of complications for Maria. Through him, she learned more strategies for facing wizards. Don't stay airborne too long, don't linger in one spot, and above all, try to stay out of a wizard's direct sight. If they can't see you, they can't aim precise spells. Draco had been confident he could spar with Maria, but aside from the Cruciatus curse, his repertoire was similar to Neville's. After Maria adapted to Neville's rhythm, she easily dodged Draco's spells. Without sword magic, many of his attacks were little more than tickles. Even when Hermione reluctantly allowed him to use Cruciatus, Maria's resistance was strong, and Draco's curse, lacking true intent to torture, only managed to cause her some pain. "That didn't even hurt as much as when I got bitten," she said, and Draco's pride was wounded. He sulked on a stool for a long time. "Hermione, when can you teach me new magic?" he asked in a low voice. After the four of them had defeated Godric the Grafted before the end of term and come back to the burrow, Hermione had watched them practice long enough to form a general impression of Draco. There was time to teach him, but Hermione had a headache over how to proceed. Draco's style was more like a traditional wizard, keeping his distance and firing spells from afar. If he had greater magical power, she could have taught him a set of shining stone magics and turned him into a kind of firepower turret. But Draco, while talented with the mind-closing technique, was not a prodigy like the very best. His power level was similar to the other young wizards. He'd only learned shining stone pebbles. Casting higher-level pebbles and the like would strain him, and even if he managed to force them, they'd likely be weak. He had also been practicing transfiguration intensively with Harry, but he was over half a school year behind the others. It would take a long time to catch up, and learning animagus was out of the question for now. Hermione couldn't yet decide what magic would suit him best. An irresponsible teacher could hand him a few difficult shining stone spells, but Hermione took her role seriously. She wanted to help Draco build a coherent combat system, not throw cheap fixes at him. Falling behind his classmates and failing to defeat a Muggle werewolf had made Draco anxious. He wanted to improve quickly, even if only to catch up. "Is it possible for me to learn incantations?" he asked hesitantly. "When I held the sacred seal, I felt I could channel some power." He hadn't mentioned it before because he inwardly had looked down on empowering Muggles that way. He believed he could do better with pure magic. Hermione paused, then realized there was logic to his thought. Draco was very skilled at the brain closure technique. He was excellent at controlling his thoughts, and that had points in common with the cultivation of faith. He might be able to activate beast stone incantations despite lacking bestial power. Given how much he revered Hermione, he could potentially meet the standards of faith. But faith is serious. If Draco were to learn incantations, it would require him to believe in Hermione with his whole heart, not the current confused mix of respect, gratitude, and fear, but absolute devotion. Could a scion of the noble Malfoy family put full faith in a half-blood witch, the very girl he had once insulted as a mudblood? Hermione told him honestly about these issues. Draco, it turned out, had treated faith too superficially. Brain closure technique taught him to close off his inner self and trust only himself. Faith demanded giving every part of oneself to another person. At her explanation, he fell silent. "You don't have to rush your decision," Hermione said. "As a wizard, you already have many possibilities. Don't change paths just because you're anxious. I also need time to think about what kind of magic would suit you best." Draco nodded quickly and thanked her. He understood she had his best interests at heart. Except in special cases like Maria, Hermione did not intend to present herself as a god. Her current mindset didn't allow that. Sometimes the remnants of the little girl she had once been showed through and made her seem naive. But most of the time she remained the rational, fierce finger maiden. The Weasley twins were curious about why Hermione knew of such strange faith-based incantation magics and pressed her for details. Hermione stuck to Dumbledore's explanation. The Sky Eye had shown her many strange sights, and those spells, as if from another world, had simply appeared at her fingertips when needed. George and Fred were envious and decided to take an extra arithmancy elective next year, hoping to awaken their own Sky Eye. They later joined Harry and the others in training, followed by Percy, and the older Weasley brothers discovered they couldn't beat Harry one-on-one consistently. Even Percy, a 7th year, would have to scramble to get away if he wasn't careful and let Harry charge at him. Percy was almost a 7th year, and by every measure his power was already nearly that of a grown wizard. As one of the top students, he was stronger than most adult witches and wizards who hadn't trained at Hogwarts. Still, against Harry, he felt painfully limited. Harry's steel chain had once seriously injured Alecto with a single strike, an aggressive, low-defense style. And though Percy knew more spells and more ways to entangle him, Harry's instinctive combat sense and increasingly deft transfiguration made Percy feel as if he couldn't get a hand on him. The spells Percy fired would be bent aside or deflected in ridiculous ways. Whenever Percy tried to alter the terrain, Harry's transfiguration would find a way through. Percy's approach was too fixed. Once Harry learned his rhythm, he could parry Percy's spells repeatedly and close the distance. Harry's physique was getting stronger. He stared with those emerald eyes and swung the chain, smashing away Percy's obstructions. With his free hand, he sent out flocks of birds to clash against Percy's conjured creatures, forcing Percy to keep retreating and dodging. Percy frowned and stopped. "No more," he said. "If I don't use blasting curses, I don't have many good options against you." After training with Hermione, using a weapon in one hand and spells in the other, and after everything he'd been through in the Forbidden Land, Harry had developed something like eyes in the back of his head. He intercepted and dodged with a skill that made a direct hit almost impossible. The only thing limiting him now was his magic reserves and stamina. High-power spells could still suppress him. Once he grew a little, learned to shrug off blasting curses, and perfected that high-speed movement, Percy couldn't think of a way to beat him besides a dense, sustained barrage of death curses. Percy felt boxed in, much like Draco had. Harry was hard enough to handle, and Ron could be infuriating in his own way. Ron's defense could be maddeningly resilient. When he went on the defensive, he seemed to play several moves ahead, always with backup plans ready. That made it difficult for Percy to break through, even with the spell chains and angles the professor had taught him. Often his best option was to grind the opponent down until their reserves ran out, while constantly watching for an unexpected counterspell. Fortunately, most of the others were dealt with quickly when it came to him, and that kept his confidence from collapsing entirely. He lowered his head and, half embarrassed, asked Hermione, "Hermione, Could I spar you? I know I'm not your match, but I want to see how big the gap is. The request made Hermione a little awkward. After a moment, she answered frankly, "It might sound blunt, Percy, but I'm stronger than I was when I fought Professor Lockhart. Much stronger." She made a wide gesture with her hand to indicate the size of the difference. Over the last year, she had learned more spells, translated and absorbed more magic from the Forbidden Land, and after gaining her moon form, her power had increased significantly. By her own estimate, no ordinary, even elite adult wizard could make her exert herself. She believed she could stand against even a battle-hardened transfiguration master like Professor McGonagall without too much trouble. Two senior professors together might make things interesting. Only the truly top-tier figures, wizards like Dumbledore or Voldemort, who had command of the Great Runes, seemed to be on a different level. Hermione's mind drifted a little. In the Forbidden Land, the Elden Ring and the Great Runes were ancient facts. The runes were rules, embedded in the ring, and when Marika shattered it, they flowed to those deemed eligible. In their world, there was no Elden Ring, and even Dumbledore's Great Rune had been something she'd seen only as a fragment, an expression of a rule that nevertheless gave him power far beyond normal magic. How the greatest wizards had come by such strength didn't sit neatly with the idea of mere talent. There had to be more to it. Maybe she could ask Dumbledore directly sometime. Given their current relationship, he probably wouldn't hide it. Percy was still standing there, awkward. Hermione softened. "My magic is different from ordinary magic, Percy, so it's not a perfect measure. But I do want to test something with you." She tapped her nose. "There's that pack of fleeing werewolves. Why don't we take a shot at them this summer? Just the two of us." Just the two of us. Percy looked around at the other children, surprised. "Not tell the adults?" Hermione shook her head. "I'll write to Professor Lily and arrange for a supply of the improved werewolf venom potion. With proper precautions, the werewolf curse is no longer the threat it used to be." She was right. In this age, a potion could blunt the worst of the lycanthropic contagion. Hermione could afford to secure them for everyone, though even the well-equipped hunters from Malfoy Manor might balk at equipping every man with a bottle. She looked at the group with seriousness in her eyes. "Everyone knows that next school year, Hogwarts heads up to the Scottish Highlands. Things there aren't looking good. There may be a fight coming. We need to be ready." "That's right," George said. "We aren't supposed to hide in the castle and wait for the professors to finish off the monsters while we go back to lessons." "Hey, why don't we design something with more power?" Fred brightened. "If we're already scared of a bunch of fleeing werewolves, how are we going to charge into mutated beast hordes later?" Harry swung his chain with a grin, eager. Ginny's wand crackled as she mimed firing like a sport. The atmosphere lightened. Everyone's training and the idea of testing themselves together had stirred them. Maria, the little werewolf girl, was quiet. She held her holy mark tightly and listened to the others. Among that pack of fleeing werewolves, she had a score to settle. She wasn't going to let violent men get away with their crimes before she had a chance at revenge. 199. Thorn in the blood. Percy never said no outright, but with him that was practically the same thing as agreeing. Once they had the adults properly briefed, Maria could be used to track down the werewolf pack. The children threw themselves into sparring practice with enthusiasm. Hermione still spent time coaching each of them, but her reserves were limited, so most of the time they trained on their own. Cedric returned during that stretch. As soon as summer break began, he had gone with his father to a black market by the Caspian Sea. It's where smugglers and dark wizards meet, contraband for both wizards and muggles. Dad moved a shipment of antibiotics out of the east through his connections, but he didn't want to bring it back by himself, the tall, thin boy explained in his soft voice. "Antibiotics? What are those for?" The young wizards had never heard the word. They're a Muggle medicine for treating infections. Very effective, almost instant, Cedric said. Professor Lily praised them too, called it the Muggles' version of potions. "What do we need that for?" "Potions should be enough," Harry said, puzzled. "Because we don't have enough potions," Hermione cut in. For minor Muggle illnesses, antibiotics work and save the women time and energy so they can produce more exploding potions and anti-radiation potions. Oh, right. Harry brightened. But why not tell the Order of the Phoenix? Mr. Amos would take you. Percy still frowned. The Order didn't trust unfamiliar wizards. They only let me go because I'm Mr. Stride's son, Cedric shrugged. It wasn't actually dangerous. This stuff is tightly controlled by Muggles. Small quantities leak out and wild Muggles treat it like divine medicine. People fight for it. The trip sounded exciting, but not dangerous, more like an insurance thing, he added. He looked around at their expanded secret base. They had added ornate furnishings for transfiguration practice, so the place felt almost like a proper small hall. Cedric noticed Maria at the back, kneeling, the sacred mark clutched in her hands, deliberately keeping her werewolf form to get used to her body and the frenzy even without moonlight. Wait. Seeing Cedric reach for his wand, everyone grabbed him, and, after explaining the whole situation, he understood. He stared at Maria and then surprised them all. When you go up against the werewolves, take me with you. I'm not missing this. With that, he became another key member of the special training group. Percy finally had a sparring partner he could enjoy. Cedric, a year below Percy, was a prefect, the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, and an excellent student. He could trade blows with Percy without either losing face. The adults were relieved and surprised by how well-behaved the children had been all year. No explosions, no sneaking out, no running to parents to complain. They helped during the day and gathered in the evenings for whatever they did. They came home exhausted and fell asleep immediately, which eased the adults' worries. Bill Weasley, sent by Mrs. Weasley to infiltrate and report back, found them holding friendly matches. In high spirits, he challenged everyone but Hermione one-on-one. Harry and the others surprised him with their strength, but Hermione eventually pinned Bill to the ground with a gravity charm so he couldn't get up, much to the children's relief. So what if you're 12? You still can't beat our soon-to-be third-year Gryffindor queen, she teased. Bill listened when Hermione explained the plan to deal with the werewolves. She wanted to use his contacts to sound out the adults and to arrange for the werewolf venom potion in advance, so the adults wouldn't balk at the idea later. Ginny and Luna would only be on the sidelines. They were still only going into their second year, and it was too much to ask of them. Even Maria would only go because she insisted. After a few days of thinking, Hermione found a suitable magic to teach Draco, the heretical branch's thorn magic. It was the heresy of exiles and sinners hated by the Academy. You harmed yourself with sinful thorns to summon blood thorns that attacked enemies. The sinners who'd been pierced by those eyes found blood stars in their eternal darkness. Hermione had been hesitant at first. The spell required self-harm and bleeding, and wasn't especially powerful in its usual form. The Tarnished rarely used it, and it was mostly show. But its casting didn't rely on intellect, it relied on faith. Then the veil over the Land of Shadow lifted, and the Tarnished discovered a far stronger analog, Thorns of Rejection. Its destructive power rivaled Origin-level spells. Even demigods could be wounded by the black thorns of the Shadow Tree, which could seal the gates of gods. Thorns of Rejection, like the heretical spell, was cast purely by faith and caused terrifying bleeding damage. Compared to the sinner's weaker blood thorns, these summoned physical black thorns were far more deadly. Hermione suspected that the sinners exiled as heretics might be connected to the Land of Shadow and the Shadow Tree. Queen Marika the Eternal had judged and exiled them to erase the Land of Shadow. With that higher-tier precedent, the heretical thorn path suddenly looked like a viable long-term option. Draco's talents fit it. He had a knack for the faith-oriented system and for brain closure techniques. His reflexes to the sacred mark were uncanny. He was a true wizard and had even used the Cruciatus Curse. He could tolerate pain and coercive magic in ways others could not. All of it made the thorn system a plausible match. This magic is very painful, Hermione warned Draco, frowning. The thorns grow from your blood. They hurt you before they hurt the enemy. Growing from blood, Draco whispered, then lifted his head and sneered. The glory of a pure-blood family. Ha! I can endure it. It suits me. He needed a way to get stronger. Even though no one openly shunned him now, the memory of having fallen into an abyss kept him uneasy. Some kinds of insecurity never entirely fade. 200. Aurora Messenger Learning. Heretical magic wasn't simple either. Just summoning the courage to wound yourself and then controlling the release of bloodthorns through the pain required iron will. On top of that, this particular casting method demanded faith. Draco had to believe, with the same kind of devotion one might reserve for a deity, that power resided in blood. The whole thing made him uncomfortable. He'd long since stopped caring about the old pure-blood dogma, but every time he practiced it, he felt the ghost of his father's lessons pressing on him. "You look like a proper vampire," Ron joked, and the sense of repeating past mistakes made it hard for Draco to concentrate. He learned slowly. Hermione didn't have a miraculous solution. Judging by the highest level spell, the Thorn of Refusal, the magic wasn't strictly tied to blood at all. The caster analyzed the power of the ghost tree and summoned its universally rejecting thorns. That level required insight and power Hermione didn't expect to teach quickly, let alone to Draco, who'd never even seen the ghost tree and could not reach its rejection through faith. The bloodthorn technique used by sinners was an easier, more comprehensible stepping stone. Only by mastering bloodthorns could one transition smoothly to ghost tree thorns. Hermione was already planning to expand the Ghostland section in the meditation basin back at Hogwarts next year. Letting Draco see the ghost tree with his own eyes then might help him improve faster. When they returned home, Bill faithfully relayed Hermione's ideas. The adults knew what the children were up to, but didn't object. After a private discussion Hermione wasn't included in, nothing changed except that Bill arrived every night loaded with food to visit the children and listen. "I'll come with you to deal with that pack of werewolves," he said one evening, sitting with his legs crossed and watching Harry practice transfiguration at a stone table. Harry was frowning as he tried to turn a struggling, squealing rat into a sunflower. "You can't even beat Hermione. What kind of insurance is that?" Ron said. Neville and Ron were sparring over control of a stone, each trying to transfigure it into the other's likeness. Magic and will wrestled inside the rock, making it squirm and deform like putty. The exercise helped them steady their focus and gather intent. Bill shrugged. "That's exactly what I said. Really, at the level of those werewolves, ones that just run around, they probably wouldn't be a match for Hermione on her own. But Mum said an adult has to watch you, so no one does anything foolish and ends up with a werewolf in their mouth," Ron protested. Hermione floated there like a small moon, not intervening in the bickering. George and Fred teamed up against Percy and Cedric, their prank war having irritated Percy enough that he allied with the soon-to-be sixth-year Cedric for a righteous mixed doubles match against the Weasley twins. Maria sat quietly, holding a holy mark and praying. It was hard to believe she had been a werewolf. She breathed slowly, her eyes clear and calm, anger kept under control. In some ways, Hermione's method, restraining the werewolves with faith, was proving effective. The bestial prayer from the Forbidden Land had replaced wildness with a kind of wise restraint. Ginny and Luna huddled together, free of heavy academic pressure beyond practicing the new spells they'd learned in second year. They read old adventure novels and the day's Daily Prophet. Hermione had her subscription delivered to White Mountain during the holidays, but she was usually too lazy to read it. "Hey, there's news," Ginny said, shaking the paper. "Malfoy Manor has hired some so-called prophet, the Aurora Messenger," she announced. Everyone stopped and gathered around. Hermione lowered a wisp of spirit light to join the moonbeam. The front page carried a large moving photograph of a man dressed like a savage, draped in thick polar bear skins, hair long and filthy, arms flung wide to the sky as if in a frenzy. From him, a brilliant aurora unfurled across the sky, painting an image of a crumbling, withered castle leaning into a dark lake, monstrous birds circling above. The castle's outer walls were breached. Shadowy beasts clung to the ramparts and roared. In the Grand Peacock Plaza, people stood around him in horror. A new post-war prophet. Going north could bring terrible disaster, the reporter declared in a sensationalist tone. The so-called Aurora Messenger, the article claimed, had drifted ashore on a plank from the Arctic and wandered to Malfoy Manor to warn the wizarding world that a great tragedy loomed. The 1,000-year-old school falling, countless children dying, and the wizarding world suffering its greatest trauma since the war. Noble families had urged caution and advised Hogwarts to reconsider going north. Trying to block Hogwarts' return, and they bring out a fake prophet, Harry said with a laugh. They don't know Hermione is the Sky Eye, and Professor Trelawney is too. If only she really were, Fred scoffed. Trelawney's reputation among students was low. Even though Hermione's oracle bubble had alleviated some of her neuroses, few students understood her lessons. Look, isn't that Professor Lockhart? Ginny sharp-eyed to a man in the crowd in the photo. Lockhart stood frowning, and a woman with a hat stood beside him. Could that be his mother? Harry's attention immediately snagged on the familiar face. But Malfoy Manor doing this will affect Hogwarts, Percy said with a frown, bringing the conversation back. Especially smaller settlements. Malfoy Manor's misinformation will mislead people and make more of them look down on Hogwarts. They're trying to create a situation where everybody criticizes Dumbledore's decision, Ron said, mock horrified. They surely don't think this will sway Dumbledore, do they? This could change the minds of many parents, Draco replied solemnly. He held a shallow, still bleeding cut that was already knitting closed in his hand. Before we left school, a number of Slytherin families were talking about pulling their children out next year. Malfoy Manor parents will act, whether for politics or their children's safety, Harry said. And wizarding families elsewhere might take their children back home, Hermione added. Everyone exchanged worried looks. That could mean many students taking a gap year or even quitting, and there might not be any new students from wizarding families. Fewer than half of the current student body could remain, and with many families withdrawing their support, Malfoy Manor could plausibly justify cutting supplies to Hogwarts. This is bad news, Hermione said. In a few days, I have to go back for the annual school board meeting. I'll ask Dumbledore what he thinks there.